Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Emma Sullivan. This happened in October 2024. The leaves had just started to turn in the North Carolina mountains, painting Linville Gorge in 1,000 shades of red and gold. Beautiful, yes, but beauty can hide darkness. I know that now. I was 34 when I organized the trip, a wildlife photographer with too much confidence in my outdoor skills and not enough respect for local legends. My boyfriend Jake, my best friend Megan, and her husband Ryan agreed to join me. Though looking back, I can see the reluctance in their eyes when I explained why we were going. "It's what Diane would have wanted," I told them, clutching the small urn containing my sister's ashes. She always talked about hiking the gorge. Diane had died exactly 1 year earlier, a sudden aneurysm that took her at 31. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. The trip was meant to be closure, a way to finally let her go. Instead, it opened something that should have remained closed. We arrived at the trailhead on a Friday afternoon. The Linville Gorge wilderness stretched before us, nearly 12,000 acres of rugged landscape carved by the Linville River. The locals call it the Grand Canyon of the East, but that doesn't capture the primeval feeling of the place, the sense that something ancient watches from the shadows between the trees. Jake checked our supplies one last time. Always the methodical one. At 36, he was the calm counterweight to my impulsivity, his IT analyst brain approaching every problem with logical precision. His sandy hair was already tucked under a hiking cap, his lean frame ready for the trek ahead. 3 days of supplies should be more than enough, he said, zipping up his backpack. We'll make it to the Linville Falls overlook by tomorrow afternoon. Camp there for the ceremony, then head back Sunday. Megan fidgeted with her hiking poles. She'd been my best friend since college, but the outdoors had never been her thing. As an elementary school teacher, she preferred the controlled chaos of a classroom to the unpredictability of nature. "You're sure the trail is well marked?" she asked, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "I read that people get lost here all the time." Ryan, her husband of 7 years, put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "That's why we have GPS, babe." He was the most physically imposing of our group, a construction manager with broad shoulders and calloused hands. Besides, Emma knows what she's doing. I wish that had been true. The first warning came before we even started hiking. An old white Chevy pickup rattled into the small gravel lot as we shouldered our packs. A woman stepped out. Late 60s maybe, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and skin weathered like old leather. She wore faded overalls and work boots caked with dried mud. "Y'all heading into the gorge," she called out, her Appalachian accent thick as molasses. I nodded. "Just for the weekend." She approached us, her eyes narrowing as she took in our gear. "You don't want to be in there after dark on this particular weekend." Jake chuckled. "Because of Halloween coming up?" The woman didn't smile. "Because of what walks there when the veil gets thin." She looked directly at me then, her pale blue eyes seeming to pierce through to my soul. "Especially not with them ashes you're carrying." I felt my blood run cold. The urn was packed deep in my bag. There was no way she could have known. "I'm Marlene Blackwood," she continued. "My family's lived at the edge of these woods for 8 generations. We know what's in there." She pointed a gnarled finger toward the dense forest. The Cherokee called her Spear Finger. Others call her the Hollow Woman. Comes for the grieving ones, wears their pain like a new skin. Ryan stepped forward. "Thanks for the concern, ma'am, but we'll be fine." Marlene shrugged. "You think you're the first confident folks to walk in there? Suit yourselves. But if you hear whistling that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, run. Don't look back. Don't stop for your friends. Just run." She returned to her truck, but before driving away, she leaned out the window. "And whatever you do, Don't answer if you hear someone you love calling your name in the dark." We laughed it off as we started down the trail, just a local trying to scare the tourists with hillbilly superstitions. Jake mimicked her accent, and Megan speculated that she probably ran the local haunted hayride. The first few hours of hiking were uneventful. The trail wound through old-growth forest, occasionally offering breathtaking views of the gorge below. I took photos at every vista, capturing the way the afternoon light played across the rugged landscape. As a wildlife photographer, I trained myself to notice details, the way shadows moved, the subtle shifts in color and light. But I missed the signs that something was wrong. It started with our phones. One by one, they died, despite having been fully charged that morning. Then, Jake's compass began to spin wildly, the needle whirling like a deranged clock hand. "Electromagnetic anomaly," he said with a nervous laugh. "Something in the mineral deposits, probably." We pressed on, using the trail markers and my paper map. By late afternoon, we reached a small clearing that seemed perfect for our first campsite, about halfway to our destination. As Ryan and Jake set up the tents, Megan collected kindling while I arranged our cooking supplies. "Did you hear that?" Megan asked suddenly, freezing in place. We all went silent, listening. At first, I heard nothing but the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then it came, a faint, melodic whistling that seemed to circle the clearing, never coming from quite the same direction twice. "Probably just the wind," Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. The whistling faded, and we continued setting up camp. Ryan got a fire going, and we prepared a simple dinner of dehydrated stew. As darkness fell, we sat around the fire trading stories and passing a flask of whiskey. The conversation inevitably turned to Diane. "Remember how she used to sing at the top of her lungs on road trips?" I said, smiling at the memory. Completely off-key, but with such conviction. "And how she could eat an entire pizza by herself," added Jake, who'd dated Diane briefly before we got together, something that had been awkward at first but eventually just became part of our shared history. "To Diane," Ryan said, raising the flask. "May she rest in peace." We all echoed the sentiment, but as I took a sip of whiskey, I felt a heaviness in the air, as if the forest had suddenly gone too quiet, like it was holding its breath. That night, I dreamed of Diane. We were hiking the same trail, but she kept walking ahead, just out of reach. Every time I called her name, she would turn slightly, not enough to see her face, and whisper something I couldn't quite hear. When I finally caught up and touched her shoulder, she turned to reveal a face that was hollow, literally empty, like looking into a dark cave where features should be. I woke with a start to find the tent empty beside me. Jake's sleeping bag was unzipped, his boots gone. The digital clock on my dead phone had somehow reactivated and was flashing 3:33 a.m. Pulling on my jacket, I unzipped the tent and stepped into the clearing. The fire had burned down to embers that cast a faint, pulsing glow. The air was unnaturally still. "Jake?" I called softly, not wanting to wake the others. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond our campsite, and I turned toward the sound. "Jake, is that you?" Another snap, closer this time. I fumbled for my headlamp and switched it on, pointing it toward the trees. The beam caught a flicker of movement, something pale disappearing behind a thick oak trunk. "This isn't funny," I hissed, moving toward the tree. As I approached, I noticed something carved into the bark, a crude symbol resembling a woman with a distended, empty center where her torso should be, surrounded by smaller figures that looked like they were being pulled into her void. A hand landed on my shoulder, and I screamed. "Whoa, easy." It was Jake, holding up his hands defensively. "Sorry, I had to take a leak." I pointed shakily at the carving. "Did you see who did this?" He frowned, examining the symbol. "That's weird. It wasn't there earlier." "How do you know? It was dark when we set up camp." "I'm pretty sure I would have noticed someone carving creepy stick figures into a tree 10 feet from our tent," he said. There was an edge to his voice I hadn't heard before. "Where were you really?" I asked. "I told you, taking a leak." He turned away. "Let's go back to sleep. We have a long hike tomorrow." Back in the tent, I watched Jake as he slipped into his sleeping bag. Something felt off about him. His movements too stiff, his responses too quick. But exhaustion soon overtook my unease and I drifted back to sleep. Morning brought new horrors. Our food supplies, vacuum-sealed and rated for months of storage, had rotted overnight. Packages bulged with mold, and the stench when Ryan opened his pack was overwhelming. "This isn't possible," he said, gagging as he dumped the contents onto the ground. Writhing white maggots spilled out with the putrid food. Megan retched, turning away. "Let's just go back. We can do the ceremony another time." I felt responsible, and this trip had been my idea. We're already halfway there. We can make it to the falls, do the ceremony, and be back at the trailhead by nightfall if we push. Jake nodded, his expression blank. Emma's right. We've come this far. Something in his voice made me look at him more closely. His eyes seemed different, flatter somehow, the warm hazel now a dull brown. When he caught me staring, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We packed quickly, leaving the rotting food behind. The day was overcast, the sun a dim smear behind thick clouds. As we hiked, I noticed more carvings on trees, always the same hollow woman symbol, becoming more frequent as we progressed deeper into the gorge. Time began to play tricks on us. My watch, which still worked unlike our phones, showed that hours passed in what felt like minutes. The trail that should have taken us to the falls by noon instead led us in confusing loops, depositing us back at landmarks we'd passed hours before. "This doesn't make sense," I said, consulting my map for the dozenth time. "We should have reached the junction by now." Ryan snatched the map from my hands, his patience clearly fraying. "You've got us lost, Emma. Admit it." "The trail is clearly marked. We've been following the blazes," I protested. "Have we?" Megan asked quietly. She pointed to a tree with a trail blaze, but instead of the standard white mark, it was a dark, rust-colored stain in the shape of the hollow woman symbol. My stomach clenched. Looking around, I realized all the trail markers had changed. We hadn't been following the trail at all. "We need to backtrack," I said, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "No." Jake's voice was firm. "We're close. I can feel it." "Close to what?" Ryan demanded. "We're lost in the middle of nowhere with no food and no working GPS." "I need to gather more firewood before it gets dark," Jake said, ignoring Ryan's outburst. "Megan, come help me." Before anyone could object, Jake strode off into the trees with Megan reluctantly following. "Something's wrong with him," Ryan muttered once they were out of earshot. I nodded. "He's been acting strange since last night." "We should never have come here," Ryan said, pacing. "That old woman tried to warn us." "You think there's actually something supernatural happening?" I asked, surprised to hear such speculation from practical, no-nonsense Ryan. He stopped pacing and looked at me intently. "I think there's something in these woods. Call it what you want. A spirit. A witch. Some kind of local psychopath. But we need to get out of here. Now." I agreed. "When they get back, we'll insist on turning around." But only Jake returned, his arms empty of the firewood he'd supposedly gone to collect. "Where's Megan?" Ryan demanded. Jake's expression remained placid. "She went to check out something she saw. Said she'd be right back." Ryan immediately pushed past him. "Which way?" "I wouldn't worry," Jake said. "She knows these woods better than any of us." "She's never been here before," Ryan shouted. "None of us have." A look of confusion briefly crossed Jake's face, then vanished. "Right, of course. She went that way." He pointed vaguely to the east. Ryan took off in that direction, calling Megan's name. I moved to follow, but Jake caught my arm, his grip painfully tight. "Let him go," he said. "We should make camp. It's getting dark." I pulled away. "We need to find her." For a moment, Jake's face seemed to ripple like heat waves off hot asphalt. His eyes, already unnaturally dull, briefly looked hollow, like empty sockets. Then he blinked, and he was Jake again, though the wrongness remained. "You're right," he said. "I'm not thinking clearly. Let's both look." We searched until dusk, calling Megan's name until our voices grew hoarse. There was no sign of her or Ryan. As darkness fell, we had no choice but to make a rudimentary camp in a small clearing, with no tents since those were in the packs Ryan and Megan had been carrying. Jake managed to start a small fire, and we sat in silence, the dancing flames highlighting the hollowness in his face. Shadows where there shouldn't be shadows. "What happened when you went to collect firewood last night?" I asked finally. He stared into the fire. "I met her, the hollow woman." A chill ran through me despite the fire's warmth. "What are you talking about?" "She's been here for centuries. The Cherokee avoided this part of the gorge because of her. Settlers who tried to farm here disappeared. Hikers go missing every year." His voice had taken on a sing-song quality that wasn't his own. "She's lonely. She needs to fill the emptiness." I started to stand, planning to run, but his hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. "She wants to talk to you, Emma. About Diane." The sound of my sister's name from his lips froze me in place. "Diane isn't at peace," he continued. "The hollow woman can help you speak to her one last time. Isn't that what you came here for? Closure?" Part of me knew it was a trap, but the mention of Diane had hooked something deep inside me. The grief I'd been carrying for a year, the questions that remained unanswered, the goodbye I never got to say. "How?" I whispered. Jake smiled, and in the firelight his teeth looked too numerous, too sharp. "We need to go to her place. It's not far." "What about Megan and Ryan?" "They're already there," he said, standing and pulling me up with him, "waiting for us." Every instinct screamed at me to run, but grief makes you vulnerable to terrible bargains. I followed Jake into the darkness, away from the trail, deeper into the gorge. The whistling started again, that eerie melody that seemed to come from everywhere at once. We walked for what felt like hours but could have been minutes. The moon cast just enough light to see the path ahead, a narrow game trail winding between ancient trees. Finally, we emerged at the edge of a small, perfectly circular clearing. At its center stood a crude stone altar, dark stains marking its surface. And on that altar lay Ryan, or what was left of him. His body had been hollowed out, literally emptied, with his ribcage split open like the shell of a crab. His face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror. Near his outstretched hand lay an empty backpack that I recognized as mine, the one containing Diane's ashes. I turned to run, but Jake was behind me, his face now a rippling mass of darkness. He grabbed me with inhuman strength and dragged me toward the altar. "She's coming," he whispered, his voice now a chorus of multiple tones speaking in unison. "She's hungry." From the opposite side of the clearing emerged a figure that made my mind recoil. It had Megan's shape, Megan's clothes, Megan's face, but that face was wrong, the features sliding around like they weren't properly attached. And her torso. There was nothing there, just a dark, empty hole where her chest and abdomen should have been, revealing the night sky behind her. "Emma," the thing wearing Megan's face said, its voice a whispery rasp. "We've been waiting for you." What happened next is difficult to describe, not because I don't remember, but because human language lacks the vocabulary for such horrors. The hollow woman, for that's what the thing was, began to expand, the emptiness at her center growing wider like a black hole consuming everything around it. I felt a tugging sensation, not on my body but on something deeper, my grief, my memories, my very essence being pulled toward that void. Jake held me firmly, preventing my escape. His face continued to shift and change until it settled into a familiar configuration that made my heart stop. Diane's face, but with that same terrible emptiness behind the features. "Join us, Emma," the thing wearing my sister's face whispered. "I've missed you so much." In that moment of shock and disbelief, Jake's grip loosened slightly. It was my only chance. I drove my elbow back into his solar plexus with all my strength. He doubled over and I broke free, stumbling away from the altar. The hollow woman shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and lurched toward me. I ran blindly into the forest, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, I could hear them pursuing, that awful whistling growing louder, seeming to come from all directions. I don't know how long I ran. Time had lost all meaning in that accursed place. Eventually, I collapsed against a tree, lungs burning, legs trembling from exhaustion. Blood trickled from dozens of small cuts on my face and arms. In the distance, I could hear them calling my name, Jake's voice, Megan's voice, and worst of all, Diane's voice, all with that same hollow quality that wasn't quite human. As I sat there, fighting to catch my breath, my hand brushed against something carved into the tree bark. Even in the darkness, I could feel the now familiar symbol of the hollow woman. I jerked my hand away as if burned. I realized then that I was still being hunted, and I couldn't keep running forever. I needed a plan. Looking around desperately, I spotted a steep slope leading down toward what I hoped was the river. If I could reach water. The voices were getting closer. I rose shakily to my feet and began carefully picking my way down the slope. The ground was treacherous, loose shale that shifted under my weight, threatening to send me tumbling. Halfway down, my foot dislodged a larger rock and suddenly I was sliding, unable to stop my descent. I crashed through underbrush, bounced off a tree trunk that sent pain shooting through my ribs, and finally came to a stop at the bottom of the ravine. Above me, I could hear the voices calling, searching. Ignoring the pain that flared with every movement, I dragged myself toward the sound of rushing water. The Linville River appeared before me, moonlight glinting off its surface. I waded in, gasping at the cold, and began moving downstream. Local legends often claimed that evil spirits couldn't cross running water. It was a desperate hope, but hope was all I had left. I followed the river for what felt like miles, occasionally hearing distant whistling that drove me to move faster despite my injuries. Eventually, the river widened and slowed, and I spotted lights in the distance, a road, civilization. Summoning my last reserves of strength, I climbed out of the water and staggered toward the lights. As I reached the road, a car approached. I waved frantically, and to my immense relief, it stopped. An elderly couple peered at me with concern. "Lord, have mercy," the woman said as her husband helped me into their back seat. "What happened to you, honey?" I couldn't tell them the truth. They would think me insane. "Hiking accident," I managed to say. "My friends, still out there." They took me to the nearest hospital in Morganton. X-rays revealed 3 broken ribs, a fractured ankle, and a mild concussion. The doctors attributed my incoherent ramblings about hollow women and possessed friends to shock and trauma. The search and rescue team found Ryan's body 2 days later, though not as I had seen it. The official report listed the cause of death as a fall resulting in massive internal trauma. They never found Jake or Megan. I tried to tell the authorities what really happened, but who would believe such a story? Eventually, I stopped trying. Let them think it was a tragic hiking accident, that Jake and Megan were still lost somewhere in the vastness of Linville Gorge. But I know better. Sometimes at night I wake to the sound of faint whistling outside my window. Sometimes my phone rings, and when I answer, I hear Jake's voice, or Megan's, or Diane's, always asking me to come back to the gorge, telling me they miss me. And sometimes, this is the worst part, I find myself standing in front of the mirror, looking at my reflection, wondering if I truly escaped. Because there are moments when my eyes seem just a little too hollow, my smile a little too wide. Moments when I feel an emptiness inside me that wasn't there before. Because the truth, the terrible truth I can barely bring myself to admit, is that I'm not sure it was really me who walked out of those woods that night. And I'm not sure that whatever did is entirely alone in here. They never did find Diane's ashes. Sometimes I wonder if that was what the hollow woman wanted all along. Not us, but the remnants of someone already touched by death, already halfway in her world. A way to make herself stronger. If you go to Linville Gorge, stay on the marked trails. Don't hike alone. And whatever you do, if you hear whistling that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, run. Don't look back. Don't stop for your friends. Just run. My name is Daniel West. I'm 34 years old. This happened in October of 2024. It'll be fun, Marcus had said, just like old times. Old times. Those words had a way of wrapping themselves around your heart, squeezing tight until nostalgia blinded you to common sense. That's how 3 former college roommates, Marcus Adler, James Cooper, and myself, found ourselves hiking through Linville Gorge in western North Carolina, a place the locals call the Grand Canyon of the East. I should have known better. Maybe I did. But when your oldest friend calls after 2 years of silence, voice cracking as he tells you his divorce was finalized, you don't say no. Not when he suggests a weekend getaway to clear our heads. Not when James immediately agrees, citing his own burnout from 70-hour weeks at his law firm. And certainly not when they both look at you, the only unmarried one, the one with the most flexibility, as if your unmarried status somehow translated to having no responsibilities worth considering. So I said yes. A 4-day trek through one of the most rugged wilderness areas on the East Coast. Just the 3 of us, together again. The first day was everything Marcus promised. Mid-October in the Blue Ridge Mountains meant a kaleidoscope of red and gold leaves, crisp autumn air that filled your lungs like salvation, and views that stretched to forever. We started at the Linville Falls trailhead, taking photos like tourists and laughing at inside jokes that hadn't aged a day in the 12 years since graduation. Remember when Professor Watkins caught you sleeping in Econ 201? James asked Marcus as we descended toward the gorge floor. Remember when you threw up on the dean's shoes at graduation? Marcus countered, and we all descended into the kind of laughter that made my chest ache with fondness. By late afternoon, we'd hiked 6 miles along the river, following the trail as it snaked between towering rock walls. We set up camp at a site near the water, the rushing sound promising to lull us to sleep. As the sun set behind the ridge, we built a fire, cooked freeze-dried meals that tasted better than they had any right to, and passed a flask of bourbon between us. "To new beginnings," Marcus said, raising the flask. His eyes reflected the firelight, but there was something behind them, something hollow that made me uneasy. "To freedom," James added. "To friendship," I said, taking the flask and swallowing the burning liquid. As night fell completely, the gorge changed. The cheerful burbling of the river took on an ominous quality, like hushed whispers just below the threshold of comprehension. The fire cast our shadows in grotesque proportions against the rock face behind us, and the vast darkness of the wilderness pressed in from all sides, making our little circle of light feel precarious and temporary. We talked about our lives. Marcus's failed marriage, James's partnership track, my stalled writing career. But as the night wore on, I noticed how Marcus kept glancing over his shoulder into the darkness beyond our camp. "You okay?" I asked during a lull in conversation. "Fine," he said too quickly. "Just thought I heard something." I listened but heard only the river and the occasional pop from our fire. "Probably just a raccoon," I offered. "Yeah," he said, but his gaze lingered on the darkness. Later, as James and I prepared for sleep, Marcus stayed by the fire. "Coming to bed?" I asked, gesturing to his tent. "In a bit," he said. "Think I'll stay up a while longer." I crawled into my tent, zipped my sleeping bag up to my chin, and fell into an uneasy sleep filled with dreams of running through endless woods while something pursued me, always just out of sight. I woke to James shaking my shoulder, his face pale in the gray dawn light. "Marcus is gone," he said. I sat up, instantly alert. "What do you mean, gone?" His sleeping bag's empty. His boots are still here, but he's not in camp. We called his name, our voices echoing across the gorge. We searched the immediate area, finding nothing but a single footprint at the edge of camp, pointing into the woods away from the trail. No other tracks, as if Marcus had simply stepped off the earth after that single step. Maybe he went to use the bathroom, I suggested, desperation edging into my voice. Without his boots? In the middle of the night? James shook his head, and he'd have been back by now. We spent hours searching, venturing farther and farther from camp in widening circles. We found nothing, no tracks, no disturbed vegetation, no scraps of clothing, nothing to indicate a grown man had passed that way. By mid-afternoon, panic had set in. Our cell phones showed no service, expected in the gorge's depths, and the nearest ranger station was at least a day's hike. "We need to go for help," James said finally, his lawyer's rationality asserting itself. "One of us needs to hike out, get to the rangers. And leave the other one here alone?" The words came out sharper than I intended. James ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Got a better idea, Dan?" I didn't, but the thought of separating made my skin crawl. "We go together," I said. "Marcus is—" I couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus is what? Dead? Lost? The gorge suddenly seemed vast beyond comprehension, a maze of stone and forest where a person could disappear forever. "We'll leave a note," James decided, "in case he comes back. Tell him to stay put." So we wrote a note on a page torn from my journal, weighed it down with stones at our campsite, and began the long hike out. We left most of our gear behind to travel faster, taking only water, some food, and essentials. The trail seemed different on the return journey. Longer. The landmarks we'd passed just the day before were somehow altered. A distinctive bent tree now stood straight. A boulder formation appeared where I was certain none had been. "Are we on the right trail?" I asked after 2 hours of hiking. James consulted the map, frowning. "Should be, but—" He trailed off, spinning slowly as he tried to orient himself. The sun was beginning its descent, shadows lengthening across the gorge floor. We needed to find the main trail before dark or risk becoming as lost as Marcus. "There," James pointed to what might have been a trail marker. We hurried toward it, relieved to find it was indeed marking the main path. But as we turned to follow it, I froze. Standing 20 yards ahead on the trail was Marcus. "Marcus!" James shouted, breaking into a run. I followed, relief flooding through me, until I got close enough to see Marcus clearly. He stood unnaturally still, arms hanging limp at his sides. His eyes were fixed on us, but they seemed wrong. Too wide, perhaps, or too empty. He was barefoot, his clothes dirt-streaked but oddly dry despite the morning dew that should have soaked him. "Where have you been?" James asked, reaching for Marcus's shoulder. "We've been looking everywhere." Marcus didn't respond to the touch, didn't blink, just stared through James as if he weren't there. "Marcus," I said, a tremor in my voice. "Are you hurt?" Slowly, so slowly it barely registered at first, Marcus's head swiveled toward me. His lips parted in what might have been a smile, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp. "I found something," he said, his voice oddly flat. "In the woods. Want to see?" Cold dread pooled in my stomach. Whatever stood before us, it wasn't Marcus, not entirely. "What did you find?" James asked, oblivious to the wrongness radiating from our friend. Marcus's head tilted at an impossible angle. "The Hollows," he said. "Where she lives." "She?" I whispered. "The Lady of Linville," Marcus replied, his smile widening to grotesque proportions. "She's been waiting for visitors." James laughed nervously. "Come on, man. You scared the hell out of us. Where were you, really?" Marcus's eyes found mine again, and in them I saw recognition. Real recognition for just a moment. Fear and desperation flashed across his face. "Run," he whispered, his own voice breaking through whatever had hold of him. Dan. Run!" Then the moment passed, and that horrible smile returned. His body jerked once, violently, like a puppet whose strings had been yanked. I grabbed James's arm. "We need to go. Now." "What?" "No, we found him. We need to—" "That's not Marcus," I hissed, pulling harder. Marcus, or the thing wearing Marcus, took a step toward us. "Don't you want to meet her? She's so lovely, so hungry for company." I yanked James backward as Marcus lunged, moving with unnatural speed. His hands, I now saw, ended in blackened fingertips, as if they'd been dipped in tar or ink, or as if the flesh there had begun to rot. James saw it too and no longer needed convincing. We turned and ran, crashing through underbrush, abandoning the trail in our panic. Behind us came a sound I'll never forget, half laugh, half screech, echoing through the gorge like something ancient and evil. We ran until our lungs burned, until we collapsed beside a small stream tumbling over moss-covered rocks. The forest was growing dark, the sun nearly gone. "What the fuck?" James gasped between breaths. "What the actual fuck was that?" I shook my head, unable to form words around the terror gripping my throat. "That wasn't Marcus," James continued, as if saying it aloud might make sense of what we'd seen. "It couldn't be." "It was him," I managed finally. "But something's wrong. Something's inside him." James stared at me, ready to argue, then slumped. "Did you see his fingers?" I nodded. "And his eyes?" "We need to get help," I said for what felt like the 100th time. "We're lost," James replied, the simple truth of it hitting us both. We'd fled blindly. No trail, no map reference. The gorge was notoriously difficult to navigate even for experienced hikers, and in our panic, we'd made every possible mistake. Night fell completely as we huddled by the stream, unsure which direction might lead to safety. We dared not light a fire, though the October night air bit through our clothes. Something told us fire would only serve as a beacon. "The Lady of Linville," James whispered at one point. "Ever heard of that before?" I hadn't, but the name tugged at something in my memory. A story half heard during our drive into the park. Perhaps. Something about a woman who'd been betrayed by her lover and had flung herself from the cliffs, her ghost said, to still wander the gorge, searching for men to lure to their deaths. But what we'd seen in Marcus's eyes wasn't a ghost. It was something older, something hungrier. "We move at first light," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "Head uphill. We'll hit a trail eventually, or at least get high enough for cell reception." James nodded, but his eyes kept scanning the darkness surrounding us. Neither of us slept. Every sound, a branch cracking, leaves rustling, water bubbling over stone, sent fresh adrenaline coursing through our veins. Twice I thought I saw movement at the edge of my vision, a flash of something pale slipping between trees. James saw it too, his hand gripping my forearm so tightly it left bruises I'd discovered days later. Dawn came with excruciating slowness. The morning mist hung heavy in the gorge, reducing visibility to mere yards. We started uphill as planned, using the stream as a guide, reasoning that it must flow down from somewhere accessible. We'd been climbing for perhaps an hour when James stopped so suddenly, I nearly collided with him. "Look," he whispered, pointing. Through the mist, partially hidden by a fallen log, lay a backpack. Marcus's backpack. "That's impossible," I muttered. We left the packs at camp. James approached it cautiously as if it might spring to life. He nudged it with his foot before kneeling to examine it. "It's empty," he reported, unzipping the main compartment. "Everything's gone." "How did it get here?" I asked, though I knew neither of us had an answer. As if in response, a branch snapped in the forest to our left. We both turned, muscles tensing. "Hello?" James called, his voice hoarse. Silence, then softly at first but growing louder, laughter. Marcus's laughter, but wrong. Too high, too sharp around the edges. "Go," I whispered, shoving James forward. "Go, go, go!" We scrambled uphill, hands and knees scraping against rock and root as we climbed. The laughter followed, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. The mist cleared briefly, revealing a sheer cliff face ahead. We'd climbed into a box canyon of sorts, no way forward except straight up the rock wall. "We have to climb it," James said, already searching for handholds. I looked back the way we'd come. Movement in the mist, a figure approaching. "Hurry," I urged, joining James at the cliff face. The climb was terrifying. 40 feet of nearly vertical rock with barely enough handholds for safety. James went first, being the stronger climber. I followed, my hands slick with sweat despite the cool air. Halfway up, James froze. "What is it?" I called. "There's someone on the ledge above," he whispered down. Before I could respond, a face appeared over the edge looking down at us. Marcus's face, but the skin now had a grayish cast, and the eyes, God, the eyes were solid black, like pools of oil. "You're going the wrong way," Marcus called down, his voice cheerful in a way that made my blood curdle. "She's waiting below, in the hollows." James's foot slipped in shock, sending small rocks clattering down past my head. He regained his grip, but I could see his arms trembling from strain and fear. "Marcus," I tried, desperation making me foolish. "Marcus, if you're in there, help us. Fight it." That horrible laughter again. Poor Daniel, not Marcus crooned. Always the sensitive one. Always believing people are fundamentally good. The thing wearing my friend's face leaned farther over the edge. "She's going to love the taste of your particular despair." "Climb!" James shouted, suddenly moving again with frantic speed. "Dan, climb!" I followed, terror giving me strength I didn't know I possessed. Marcus disappeared from the ledge above, but I could hear movement. He was repositioning. James reached the top first, scrambling onto the ledge with a grunt. He turned immediately, extending his hand down to me. I was 3 feet from the top when Marcus reappeared behind James. "Behind you!" I screamed. James half-turned too late. Marcus, or the thing that had been Marcus, slammed into him with inhuman strength. They grappled at the cliff's edge, too close, too dangerous. I climbed faster, knowing what was about to happen but powerless to stop it. "Dan!" James cried, his voice breaking with fear as he lost his footing. For a moment, they were both silhouetted against the pale morning sky. James falling backward, Marcus lurching forward as if to catch him, their hands almost connecting. Then James was gone, his scream echoing off the gorge walls as he fell. I heard the impact. I will always hear the impact. Marcus turned to me, still 3 feet below the ledge. His face split into that terrible smile again. "Your turn," he said. I did the only thing I could. I let go. The fall wasn't far, 15 feet at most to a narrow shelf I'd spotted on my way up. I hit hard, pain lancing through my ankle as it twisted beneath me. But I was alive, and the shelf connected to another series of ledges leading in a different direction. I scrambled away, not daring to look up, not daring to see if Marcus was finding his way down after me. My ankle screamed with every step, but terror is a powerful anesthetic. The ledges led to a narrow chimney in the rock face, a near-vertical crevice just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I forced myself into it, using my back and feet to brace against opposite walls as I inched upward. If Marcus followed, he'd have to come one way, with no chance to flank me. I don't know how long I climbed. Time lost meaning in that dark crack of stone, with nothing but the sound of my labored breathing and the distant rush of water. My muscles burned. My ankle throbbed. But still I pushed upward, driven by the image of James's fall and the thing wearing Marcus's face. When I finally emerged at the top, the sun was high overhead. I found myself on the gorge rim, overlooking a landscape of undulating forest canopy. Under different circumstances, the view would have been breathtaking. My phone showed 1 bar of service, enough. I called 911 with shaking hands. The next hours passed in a blur. Search and rescue, police interviews, the recovery of James's body from the base of the cliff, his neck broken from the fall. No sign of Marcus, despite an extensive search. My statement, a sanitized version claiming Marcus had been acting strangely before James's accidental fall, met with skepticism but no outright disbelief. They found our original campsite untouched, exactly as we'd left it, including the note we'd written to Marcus. My gear was there, James's gear was there, and most damningly, so was Marcus's gear, including his boots, his phone, even the clothes he'd been wearing when we last saw him at camp, the boots that had remained behind when he vanished. The search for Marcus continued for weeks. They found nothing, not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not a single sign that he had ever walked into those woods. The official report listed him as missing, presumed dead, perhaps fallen into the river and swept away, perhaps victim to some other wilderness mishap. I know better. Sometimes, in my dreams, I see him still, standing at the forest's edge, fingers blackened, eyes like oil, smiling that awful smile. Behind him, half hidden in the shadows, stands a woman in a tattered dress, her face obscured by long dark hair. The lady of Linville, I presume, though I never saw her clearly in waking life. They whisper to me in these dreams. They tell me they're waiting, that the hollows still hungers, that one day I'll return to the gorge, drawn back by bonds of friendship and guilt that never truly break. I've moved since then, changed my number, done everything I can to put distance between myself and North Carolina. But some nights, when the wind blows just right, I swear I hear Marcus's laughter outside my window. And in the morning, I sometimes find a single muddy footprint on my porch, despite no rain for days. I know what it means. The lady has marked me, and Marcus, or what used to be Marcus, is her messenger. I'm writing this down as a warning. Stay on the marked trails in Linville Gorge. Don't hike alone. And if you encounter a man with blackened fingertips and a smile that's just a little too wide, run. Run, and don't look back, because the Lady of Linville is always hungry for visitors, and her hollow servants never stop hunting. My name is Daniel West. I'm 34 years old. This happened in October of 2024, and I know with bone-deep certainty that it isn't over. My name is Elijah Blackwood. This happened in October 2024. Time works differently in Linville Gorge. That's what they say anyway. The locals call it the Grand Canyon of North Carolina, with a mixture of pride and trepidation in their voices. I'd never paid much attention to the whispered warnings or old tales about people going missing there. Nature is just nature. Predictable, explainable. Or so I thought until 5 days in the wilderness changed everything I believed about reality. I'm a software developer who'd been working remotely for 3 years, barely leaving my apartment in Charlotte except for groceries and the occasional run. When my childhood friend Marcus suggested a hiking trip to reset our brains after he'd gone through a nasty divorce, I reluctantly agreed. I'd grown soft behind my screens, but I figured a few days in the wilderness might do me good. Marcus brought along his brother-in-law, Chris, a lean, tattooed former Marine with a perpetual scowl who seemed to communicate primarily through grunts and nods. The three of us had planned a 5-day trip through the most remote sections of Linville Gorge wilderness, a challenging hike even for experienced outdoorsmen, which none of us truly were, despite Chris's military background. "It'll be great," Marcus insisted when I expressed concerns about the difficulty. "Chris knows what he's doing. He's hiked this area before." What neither mentioned until we were already 2 hours into the drive was that Chris's experience with the area consisted of one guided day trip 3 years earlier. But by then, my apartment was already far behind us, and the gentle slopes of the Blue Ridge Mountains loomed ahead. The first warning sign came at the trailhead. An older ranger with leathery skin and eyes that had seen too much stopped us as we shouldered our packs. "You boys planning to camp in the gorge?" he asked, eyeing our gear. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. 5 days, taking the loop through the wilderness area. The ranger's weathered face tightened almost imperceptibly. Stick to the marked trails. Don't go wandering after dark. And if you hear anything that sounds unusual, just keep moving. Unusual like what? I asked. The ranger seemed to debate with himself before answering. Just stick together. People who get separated in Linville sometimes don't find their way back. He handed us a map, already marked with our intended route, but I noticed there was a section circled in faded red ink with the words "Avoid Hunting Cabin" written beside it. What's this about? I pointed to the marking. Old notation, just stay on the trail. He walked away before we could ask anything else. Chris shrugged it off. Probably just trying to spook the tourists. Let's move. The first 2 days were spectacular. The autumn foliage painted the mountains in brilliant reds and golds. We followed the trail along ridgelines that offered breathtaking views of the gorge below, the Linville River winding like a silver ribbon through ancient forests. The physical exertion felt good after months of sedentary work, and even the strain in my muscles was a welcome change. We set camp each night before dark, built respectable fires, and swapped stories under stars that seemed impossibly bright away from city lights. On the 3rd day, everything changed. We'd reached the deepest part of the gorge by late afternoon. The trail here was more challenging, descending steeply along switchbacks to the valley floor. The dense canopy above blocked much of the sunlight, casting everything in a perpetual green twilight. The temperature dropped noticeably as we descended, and an unusual silence settled around us. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just the sound of our boots on the trail and our increasingly labored breathing. We should set up camp soon, I suggested, noting how the light was fading faster than expected. Chris checked his GPS. We're not where we should be. He frowned at the device, tapping it against his palm. This says we're half a mile off the trail, but that's impossible. We haven't left it. Marcus peered over his shoulder. Maybe the signal's bouncing off the cliffs. These walls are pretty steep. No, look. Chris showed us the map. According to the GPS, we were heading straight toward the area the ranger had marked to avoid. Let's backtrack, I suggested. Too late for that, Marcus said, looking at the darkening sky. We need to make camp. We can sort it out in the morning. We found a small clearing not far from the trail, at least what we thought was the trail, and set up our tents. The air had grown unnaturally still, and despite the physical exertion of the day, I felt a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. As I collected firewood, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched from between the trees. That night, I woke to a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard before, somewhere between a woman's wail and the scream of a wounded animal, echoing through the gorge. I sat bolt upright in my tent, heart hammering in my chest. "Did you guys hear that?" I called out. Marcus mumbled something incoherent from his tent. Chris didn't respond at all. I unzipped my tent and peered out. The fire had died to embers, casting just enough light to see the outline of our small camp. Chris's tent was open, empty. "Chris," I called, keeping my voice low. No response. I grabbed my headlamp and shook Marcus awake. "Chris is gone." Together, we searched the immediate area, calling his name in urgent whispers. Nothing. We debated what to do. Wait until morning or look for him now, when we heard it again. That terrible wailing cry, closer this time. "That's not an animal," Marcus whispered, his face pale in the beam of my headlamp. "Chris," I shouted, forgetting our earlier caution. "Chris!" My voice echoed back to us, and then laughter. High, childlike laughter that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. "We need to find him," Marcus insisted, already pulling on his boots. I wanted to argue, to say we should stay put until daylight. But what if Chris was injured? What if he needed help? Reluctantly, I agreed, and we set off in the direction of the laughter, headlamps cutting weak paths through the oppressive darkness. The forest played tricks on us. Distances seemed wrong, landmarks appeared and disappeared, and twice we found ourselves back at our own campsite despite walking in what we thought was a straight line. The third time we set out, we marked trees with bright orange surveyor's tape to track our path. After what felt like hours of searching, we stumbled upon a small clearing we hadn't seen before. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its windows dark, its porch sagging dangerously to one side. The hunting cabin from the map. It had to be. "Chris?" Marcus called, his voice cracking slightly. No answer, but the door of the cabin creaked open an inch as if inviting us in. "I don't like this," I muttered, but Marcus was already approaching the structure. Against my better judgment, I followed. The floorboards of the porch groaned under our weight, and the door swung further open at Marcus's touch, revealing a dark interior that smelled of mold and something else, something metallic and organic. Our headlamps revealed a single room with sparse furnishings. A rusted iron bed frame, a wooden table, and a chair. The walls were covered with yellowed newspaper clippings and what looked like photographs, impossible to make out clearly in the poor light. And in the center of the floor sat Chris, cross-legged, staring at the far wall. "Chris! Jesus, man, we've been looking everywhere for you." Marcus rushed to his side. "Are you okay?" Chris didn't respond, didn't even blink, just kept staring at the wall. I approached slowly, sweeping my headlamp across the cabin. The beam landed on the wall Chris was facing, illuminating what he found so captivating. Hundreds of small dolls hanging from nails driven into the wood. Crude things made of twigs bound with what looked like human hair, each with a scrap of fabric or piece of clothing attached. "What the hell?" I whispered. Chris finally spoke, but his voice sounded wrong, higher with an unsettling sing-song quality. "She's been waiting for you, Elijah. She's been waiting such a long time." Marcus recoiled from his brother-in-law. "Chris, what are you talking about? Who's been waiting?" Chris's head rotated toward us with mechanical precision, but his eyes remained fixed on the wall of dolls. "The lady of the gorge. She needs new friends. She gets so lonely down here." A sound from outside, branches snapping under weight. Marcus and I whirled toward the door, but Chris remained motionless. "We need to go," I said, grabbing Marcus's arm. "Now!" "We can't leave Chris," he protested. "Something's wrong with him. We'll have to carry him if necessary, but we need to get out of here." We each took one of Chris's arms and hauled him to his feet. He didn't resist, but he didn't help either, his body limp and heavy between us. As we dragged him toward the door, his head lolled back, and he started laughing, that same high, childlike laugh we'd heard earlier. Outside, the forest had transformed. A thick mist had descended, limiting visibility to just a few feet around us. Our orange markers were nowhere to be seen. I felt a panic rising in my chest, threatening to overwhelm rational thought. "Which way?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with fear. Before I could answer, Chris went rigid in our grasp. His head snapped forward, eyes wide and alert. "She's coming," he whispered in his own voice, his normal voice. For a moment, the real Chris was back, was terror etched across his features. "Run! Don't look back! Don't—" His words cut off as his body convulsed, his back arching unnaturally. We dropped him in shock, and he fell to the ground, limbs twitching and jerking like a puppet on tangled strings. Then, with movements no human body should be capable of, he scrambled backward into the darkness of the cabin on all fours, disappearing from sight. Marcus made to follow, but I grabbed him. "We can't help him right now. We have to find our way back to camp." The wail came again, so close it might have been right behind us, and we ran. Blind panic fueled us as we crashed through underbrush, slipping on wet leaves, gasping for breath. I don't know how long we ran before Marcus fell, his foot caught in a root. I heard the snap of bone and his agonized cry. "My ankle," he gasped when I knelt beside him. "I think it's broken." I shone my headlamp on his leg. His ankle was already swelling, twisted at an unnatural angle. There was no way he could walk, let alone run. "I'll help you," I promised, slinging his arm over my shoulder. We made painfully slow progress, Marcus hopping on one foot while I supported his weight. The mist swirled around us, and more than once I thought I saw shapes moving within it. Tall, unnaturally thin figures that seemed to bend in impossible ways. When we finally stumbled back into our campsite, it was in shambles. Our tents had been torn to shreds, our supplies scattered. Only my backpack remained untouched, sitting precisely in the center of the clearing as if placed there deliberately. "What do we do now?" Marcus asked through gritted teeth as I helped him sit on a fallen log. I checked my phone. No signal, as expected. The GPS was equally useless, showing our location jumping erratically around the map. "We need to get help for your ankle." And Chris. I trailed off, not wanting to voice what we both suspected. Chris might be beyond help. "We can't leave him," Marcus insisted. "We don't have a choice. You can't hike out, and I can't carry you both." As we argued, the temperature dropped further. Our breath fogged in the air despite it being only October. The mist thickened, and through it came the sound of something heavy moving toward us, branches breaking under significant weight. "Get behind me," I told Marcus, grabbing a heavy branch as a makeshift weapon. The noises grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Silence fell, more terrifying than any sound could have been. Then, from just beyond the edge of our headlamp's reach, "Elijah." Chris's voice, but wrong again, stretched and distorted like audio played at the wrong speed. "The lady wants to meet you, Elijah." Chris stepped into the light, but it wasn't really Chris anymore. His body moved like it was being operated by someone who didn't quite understand how human joints worked. His eyes were wide and vacant, his mouth stretched in a grin that showed too many teeth. "Stay back," I warned, raising my branch. Not, Chris tilted his head at an impossible angle. "Don't you want to play with us, Elijah? The lady has so many games." "What lady?" I demanded, hoping to keep it talking while I tried to think of a way out. "The lady of the gorge. She's been here since before the trees, before the mountains. She collects friends, so she's never alone." Not, Chris took another step forward, movements jerky and uncoordinated. "She wants you most of all, Elijah. She says you have the perfect face." Marcus grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Don't listen to it, that's not Chris." Not Chris's attention snapped to Marcus, head rotating with a sickening crack. "Little brother," it crooned in a perfect imitation of Chris's normal voice. "You always were the favorite. That's why I let Karen. Let her go. Let her leave." The thing wearing Chris's body bent forward. "But you knew that already, didn't you?" Marcus went pale. "What are you talking about?" "She came to me, before the papers, asked my permission to love you instead." Not, Chris straightened. "I said yes, gave you my blessing, never told you. Thought it would hurt less if you believed it was sudden." Tears welled in Marcus's eyes. "You're lying." "The lady knows all secrets," Not Chris said, voice shifting back to that unsettling sing-song tone. "All the little whispers we keep in the dark parts of ourselves." I didn't know if what the thing was saying was true, but I knew we needed to leave immediately. While Not Chris focused on Marcus, I chanced to glance behind us. If we could make it up the slope, maybe we could outrun whatever had taken over Chris's body. Not. Chris must have sensed my thoughts. Its head snapped back to me, and in a blur of movement too fast to track, it was suddenly inches from my face. I swung the branch reflexively, connecting solidly with its head. There was a wet crunch, and Not Chris crumpled to the ground. Horror washed over me as I realized what I'd done. "Oh God, Chris!" But the thing wearing Chris's body was already getting up, head hanging at an angle that confirmed his neck was broken. "That wasn't very nice. Elijah," it said, voice bubbling through what must have been a crushed windpipe. I grabbed my backpack and pulled Marcus to his feet. "We have to go. Now." We half ran, half stumbled up the slope, Marcus gasping in pain with each step. Behind us, not Chris called out in that awful sing-song voice, promising games and friendship and secrets. Other voices joined in, some childlike, some ancient and rasping, all speaking in unison about the lady and her loneliness and her special plans for us. I don't know how we made it through that night. Hours blurred together as we pushed ourselves well beyond exhaustion, using the slope to guide us upward, hoping to reach the ridgeline and the main trail by morning. Marcus's ankle swelled to twice its normal size, but he refused to stop, driven by the same primal fear that kept me moving despite muscles screaming in protest. As dawn broke, we emerged onto the ridgeline trail, the one we should have stayed on 3 days ago. Below us, Linville Gorge was filled with mist, looking peaceful and ordinary in the morning light. No sign of pursuit, no unearthly wails or childish laughter. "Do you think it's over?" Marcus asked, collapsing onto a boulder, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. Before I could answer, my phone chimed. Signal. 1 bar, but enough. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers and reported our situation. Injured hiker, missing person. The dispatcher assured us a rescue team would reach us within hours. While we waited, I tended to Marcus's ankle as best I could with the first aid kit from my miraculously intact backpack. Neither of us spoke about what had happened, as if putting it into words might summon it back. The rescue team arrived efficiently, 2 rangers and a paramedic who splinted Marcus's ankle and helped him onto a stretcher. When I told them Chris was missing, possibly injured in the area near an old hunting cabin, their expressions changed. "The Whitaker place," one ranger asked the other, who nodded grimly. "We'll send a search team," the first ranger assured me, but something in his tone suggested he didn't expect to find Chris alive. At the ranger station, while Marcus was being loaded into an ambulance, I pulled the older ranger from the trailhead aside. "What is the Lady of the Gorge?" I asked bluntly. His weathered face closed off. "Just an old story. Nothing to concern yourself with." "We saw things in there," I pressed. "Things that weren't natural. And Chris, something happened to him." The ranger studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "Linville has always had stories. Missing hikers, strange lights, voices where there shouldn't be any. Most places like this do." "But what is she?" He shook his head. "Some say she was a witch, back in colonial times. Some say she's something that was here long before people came to these mountains. Just stories." "Then why mark the cabin on the map? Why warn us to avoid it?" "Because people who go there tend not to come back," he said simply. "Or if they do, they're not right anymore. That's all I know, son. That's all anyone knows." I wanted to press further, but the ambulance was ready to leave, and I needed to go with Marcus. As we pulled away from the ranger station, I looked back at the gorge rising in the distance, beautiful and serene in the morning light. Nothing about it suggested the horrors we'd experienced. The search for Chris continued for 2 weeks before being called off. No trace was ever found, not even footprints leading away from where we last saw him. It was as if the gorge had simply swallowed him whole. Marcus recovered physically, but our friendship didn't survive what happened. Too many questions, too many painful memories. The thing that wasn't Chris had planted seeds of doubt about his failed marriage that Marcus couldn't shake, true or not. Last I heard, he'd moved to Seattle, about as far from North Carolina as he could get. As for me, I haven't been hiking since. I tried once on a popular, well-traveled trail near Charlotte. Made it about half a mile before panic set in. The sensation of being watched, of being followed. I stick to city parks now. Places where I can always see the skyline, always hear traffic. But sometimes, especially on foggy nights when the city lights reflect and diffuse in the mist, I hear it again. That high, childlike laughter followed by a woman's wail. And in those moments, I know with bone-deep certainty that the Lady of the Gorge isn't confined to that wilderness. She's patient, she's waiting, and she still wants my face for her collection. Time works differently in Linville Gorge, they say. I think about that often, about Chris, still out there somewhere in those ancient woods, his body moving in ways no human body should move, luring unsuspecting hikers to the lady with his too wide smile and broken neck. I wonder if, for him, it's been minutes or centuries. I wonder if any part of him is still aware, still screaming silently from whatever prison the lady has trapped him in. Most of all, I wonder when she'll send him to collect me. Because deep down, I know our encounter wasn't random. The lady chose us, chose me. And what the Lady of the Gorge wants, eventually, she takes. So if you find yourself in the wilderness of western North Carolina, stick to the marked trails. Don't hike alone. And if you hear childish laughter echoing through the trees, or a woman's wail carrying on the wind, turn back immediately. Don't look for its source, and whatever you do, stay away from any cabins you might find. The lady is always looking for new friends, and she gets so very lonely in the gorge. My name is Nathan Webb. This happened in October 2024. I've spent the last 6 months questioning whether to share this story. Part of me hopes that writing it down might exorcise it from my mind, though I doubt anything will truly erase what I experienced in the wilderness of North Carolina's Linville Gorge. I was 34 when I decided to take that solo hiking trip. My divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier, ending an 8-year marriage that had collapsed under the weight of my workaholism and Emily's growing resentment. The accountancy firm I worked for had grudgingly approved my request for a week off, though my boss made it clear he expected me to remain reachable by phone. I had no intention of honoring that expectation. The only companion I wanted was Rex, my 5-year-old German Shepherd mix who'd been the one constant through the turbulence of the past year. We'd adopted him as a rescue pup, and when Emily and I split, there was never any question that Rex would stay with me. He was protective, loyal, and seemed to understand my moods better than any human ever had. The Linville Gorge wilderness within Pisgah National Forest was my destination, partly because I'd read about its breathtaking beauty, but mostly because it was known for spotty cell reception. I craved isolation, a clean break from spreadsheets and client calls and the echoing emptiness of my apartment. I needed to recalibrate. I arrived at the Wolf Pit trailhead on a crisp Monday morning. The October air carried the earthy scent of decaying leaves, and the forest was ablaze with autumn colors. Rex bounded from the car, his tail wagging with excitement as he explored our surroundings. I shouldered my pack, clipped Rex to his lead, and set off. The first 2 days went exactly as planned. We hiked the established trails, set up camp in designated areas, and I began to feel the knots in my mind loosening. Rex was in his element, alert to every squirrel and bird, pulling me forward with enthusiastic energy. Each night I'd build a fire, prepare a simple meal, and fall asleep to the soothing sounds of the wilderness. For the first time in months, I slept deeply. Everything changed on the 3rd day. We were exploring the area around Shortoff Mountain when I noticed a narrow path veering off the main trail. It wasn't marked on my map, but it looked well-traveled enough. Something about it called to me, perhaps the way the sunlight filtered through the canopy of leaves, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. Or maybe it was simply my desire to venture further from the more populated hiking routes. "What do you think, buddy? Should we check it out?" I asked Rex. He sniffed the air, his ears perked forward and wagged his tail. I took that as a yes. The path was steeper than it had appeared initially, winding through increasingly dense forest. After about 30 minutes of hiking, we came upon a crude wooden sign nailed to a massive oak tree. The Hollow Trail. The lettering was uneven, as if carved by hand and weathered by years of exposure. I consulted my map again but found no mention of this trail. My GPS app showed we were still within the boundaries of Linville Gorge, though in a less frequented section. I hesitated, but my curiosity won out. We continued forward. The forest grew denser as we ventured deeper into the hollow, the trees closer together, their branches interlacing overhead to create a natural tunnel. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the vibrant autumn colors I'd admired earlier gave way to muted browns and grays. Even the birdsong that had accompanied our journey seemed to fade until the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath my boots and Rex's panting. "Hello there." The voice startled me so badly I nearly lost my footing on the rocky path. Rex let out a low, warning growl. A man stood about 20 feet ahead on the trail. He appeared to be in his 50s, with a weather-beaten face and a salt and pepper beard. His gear looked well-worn but high quality, and he carried himself with the ease of someone accustomed to the wilderness. "Sorry to startle you," he said, approaching with his hand extended. "Name's Richard Blackwood." "Nathan," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was unnervingly cold. "And this is Rex." Rex continued to growl softly, the fur along his spine raised. It was uncharacteristic of him. He was usually friendly with strangers. "Easy, boy," I murmured, placing a calming hand on his head. Richard smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Smart dog. They always know." "Know what?" I asked. "When they're far from home." Richard gestured around us. "Not many folks venture down the hollow trail these days. Used to be more popular, back when the logging camp was active." "Logging camp?" "Blackwood Lumber. My family's operation, 3 generations back. Closed down in '63 after the incident." His voice trailed off, and he seemed to be looking through me rather than at me. "What incident?" Richard's focus snapped back. "Nothing worth dwelling on. Ancient history." He glanced at the sky, which was barely visible through the thick canopy. "Getting late. You camping nearby?" I hesitated before answering. Something about Richard set me on edge, though I couldn't articulate why. "Just exploring for now. Might head back to my original campsite. There's a good spot about a mile ahead. Small clearing by a creek, flat ground, protected from the wind." He pointed down the trail. "I'm heading back that way myself if you want company." Rex's growl deepened. "Thanks, but I think we'll take our time," I said. "Rex likes to explore." Richard nodded, his eyes lingering on Rex. "Beautiful animal. Loyal, I bet. The kind that would follow you anywhere." He adjusted his pack. "Well, maybe I'll see you down the trail, Nathan. Be careful out here. Easy to lose track of things in the hollow." As he walked past us, Rex positioned himself between me and Richard, his body tense. I kept a firm hand on his collar until Richard disappeared around a bend in the path. "What was that about, boy?" I whispered to Rex, who was still staring in the direction Richard had gone. "You're not usually so unfriendly." We continued down the path, though my earlier enthusiasm had dimmed. Something about my encounter with Richard Blackwood had unsettled me. His name, Blackwood, matching the supposed family lumber operation, seemed too neat, almost staged. And there was the way Rex had reacted to him. The unnatural chill of his handshake. The odd vacancy that had momentarily claimed his expression. Still, I reasoned, the woods were full of eccentric characters. Richard was probably harmless, just socially awkward from spending too much time alone in the wilderness. I decided to continue along the hollow trail for another hour before turning back. The path descended into a ravine where the trees grew so close together that they blocked most of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight. The air felt heavier here, almost oppressive, carrying a musty scent like wet earth and decay. Water dripped from leaves despite there having been no rain for days. When we reached the clearing Richard had mentioned, I paused to rest and give Rex some water. It was indeed a perfect camping spot. A level area beside a clear, burbling creek, surrounded by a natural windbreak of boulders and dense foliage. I checked my watch, 3:14 p.m. Plenty of time to explore further before heading back. As Rex lapped water from my cupped hands, I noticed something peculiar on a nearby tree, a symbol carved into the bark. It looked freshly made, the exposed wood still pale. The design was simple but unsettling. A circle with a vertical line bisecting it, and several smaller lines radiating outward like crooked fingers. I approached for a closer look, running my fingers over the carving. The wood felt unnaturally cold. Rex suddenly jerked his head up, water dripping from his muzzle, and stared intently into the forest on the other side of the clearing. His ears were forward, his body rigid with attention. "What is it, boy?" I whispered. A twig snapped in the distance. Rex barked once, sharp and urgent. "Hello?" I called out. "Richard, is that you?" No response came, but I could have sworn I heard breathing, deep and labored from the shadows between the trees. Rex began to back toward me, his hackles raised, a continuous growl rumbling in his chest. "Let's head back," I said, as much to myself as to Rex. I gathered our things quickly, my heart pounding against my ribs. As we turned to retrace our steps, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The sun was setting. Golden light angled through the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing. I checked my watch again. 3:17 p.m. It should have been hours before sunset. I pulled out my phone to verify the time. The screen showed 7:23 p.m., but that couldn't be right. We'd only been on the trail for a few hours. I'd lost track of time before while hiking, but never for hours. "Come on, Rex," I urged, quickening my pace as we started back up the trail. The forest had transformed in some subtle but disconcerting way. The path seemed narrower, the trees closer, branches reaching lower as if trying to impede our progress. What little daylight remained faded rapidly, and soon I was using my flashlight to navigate the increasingly treacherous terrain. Rex stayed close to my side, occasionally whining or looking back over his shoulder. Twice he stopped abruptly, refusing to move forward until I tugged gently on his lead, and once he barked at what appeared to be empty air. The journey back seemed to take twice as long as our initial hike. When we finally reached the junction with the main trail, night had fully descended. I considered making camp right there, but decided against it. I wanted as much distance as possible between us and the hollow trail. We hiked another hour by flashlight before reaching our original campsite. Exhausted, I quickly set up the tent, fed Rex, and prepared a simple meal for myself, though I found I had little appetite. As I sat by the small fire, I tried to make sense of the day's events. The time discrepancy bothered me most. I checked my watch again and found it was now running normally, showing the correct time of 9:47 p.m. My phone, however, had died, despite having been nearly fully charged that morning. Rex refused to settle, pacing around our campsite, pausing occasionally to stare intently into the darkness beyond the fire's glow. I attributed his behavior to wildlife in the area, probably deer or raccoons attracted by our presence. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. Each time I'd drift off, I'd jerk awake, convinced I'd heard someone, or something, moving just outside the tent. Rex's vigilance didn't help. He remained alert, occasionally growling softly at the night. Around midnight, I finally fell into a fitful sleep, populated by unsettling dreams of being followed through an endless forest by a figure I could never quite glimpse. In the dream, I kept calling for Rex, but he never came. I woke to gray dawn light filtering through the tent fabric and the realization that Rex was gone. The tent flap was open. I was certain I'd zipped it closed before falling asleep. Rex's lead lay beside my sleeping bag, the clip undone. Cold fear gripped me as I scrambled outside, calling his name. Our campsite looked wrong. My carefully organized supplies were scattered, some items missing entirely. The remains of last night's fire were cold ash, yet arranged in a pattern that seemed deliberate. The same symbol I'd seen carved into the tree on the hollow trail. "Rex!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. "Rex, come!" Only silence answered. I circled the campsite with growing panic, looking for tracks, any indication of where he might have gone. The ground was too hard, too covered with fallen leaves to show clear prints. I was about to expand my search when I noticed my backpack. I'd left it leaning against a tree the night before, but now it lay open on the ground. I approached cautiously, then recoiled at the smell. the sickly, sweet odor of rot and decay. Every food item I'd packed had spoiled overnight. Apples had blackened and collapsed inward, beef jerky crawled with maggots, granola bars were covered in mold. Even my water had turned a murky brown, with something dark and thread-like floating inside the bottles. This was impossible. Most of these items had been sealed in plastic. Even in the dampness of the forest, they couldn't have decomposed so completely in a single night. I emptied the ruined supplies, gagging at the stench, and repacked what remained usable: my compass, map, first aid kit, and extra clothing. My hands shook as I worked, and I kept pausing to call for Rex, hoping to hear the familiar jingle of his tags or the sound of his bark. With my campsite dismantled and my pack readied, I faced a decision: hike back to my car and seek help from park rangers, or search for Rex myself. The thought of leaving without him was unbearable, but I also knew that wandering aimlessly through the wilderness was dangerous. I consulted my map, trying to formulate a systematic search pattern. As I studied the familiar trails and landmarks, my eye kept returning to the area where the hollow trail should have been. It wasn't marked, but I knew approximately where it had branched off from the main path. An inexplicable certainty settled over me. That's where I would find Rex. The rational part of my brain argued against returning to the hollow trail. Everything strange and unsettling had begun there. But if someone, Richard, had taken Rex, that's where they would have gone. Decision made, I shouldered my lightened pack and headed back toward Shortoff Mountain and the entrance to the hollow trail. The forest felt different in daylight, less oppressive, and I began to wonder if stress and exhaustion had magnified my unease the previous day. It took me just over an hour to reach the junction. The crude wooden sign was still there. The hollow trail. Had the lettering always been so jagged, so deeply carved? It seemed more like claw marks than human handiwork now. I hesitated only briefly before starting down the path, calling Rex's name every few minutes. The dense canopy once again blocked much of the sunlight, creating that perpetual twilight I'd noticed before. I kept careful track of time, checking my watch regularly. It seemed to be functioning normally. About a half-mile down the trail, I found Rex's collar. It lay in the middle of the path, the blue nylon frayed and stained with what looked disturbingly like blood. The tags were missing. My heart hammered against my ribs as I picked it up. "Rex!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Rex, where are you?" "Boy?" A branch snapped somewhere in the forest to my right. I spun toward the sound, peering into the gloom between the trees. "Who's there?" I called, trying to keep the fear from my voice. "Richard, is that you?" Movement caught my eye, a dark shape flitting between distant trunks, too large to be a deer, too agile for a bear. "Rex?" Hope surged. I started toward the movement, pushing through underbrush and over fallen logs. I emerged into a small clearing and stopped short. In the center stood a crude structure assembled from branches and animal bones, a sort of primitive altar. Atop it sat Rex's tags, the metal catching what little light filtered through the trees. As I approached the altar, I noticed more symbols carved into the surrounding trees, dozens of them, variants of the circle and line design I'd seen earlier. Some were weathered, suggesting they'd been there for years, while others looked freshly carved, the wood still seeping sap like blood from a wound. The tags jingled faintly as I lifted them, though there was no breeze. I turned them over in my hand, confirming they were indeed Rex's, his name and my phone number engraved on the stainless steel disc. "What happened to my dog?" I whispered to the silent forest. "He found his way home," a voice answered from behind me. I whirled around. Richard Blackwood stood at the edge of the clearing, his expression serene, almost pitying. "Where is he?" I demanded. "What did you do to him?" Richard spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "I haven't done anything to your dog, Nathan. But the Hollow, it has its own ways." "What does that mean? Where's Rex?" "The Hollow Trail isn't just a path through the woods, it's a boundary between places." Richard took a step forward. "Between what is and what appears to be. between empty and filled. The way he emphasized that last word sent a shiver down my spine. I backed up until I felt the altar pressing against my legs. "You're not making any sense," I said, though a terrible understanding was beginning to form. "I think I am," Richard replied, "and I think you understand more than you're willing to admit. Have you noticed anything unusual since you entered the Hollow? Time slipping away? Things decaying too quickly? Your dog behaving strangely?" I swallowed hard. "Who are you? What do you want?" Richard smiled, and this time the expression reached his eyes, transforming his face into something barely recognizable as human. His pupils expanded until his eyes were black pools, and his skin seemed to shift, like something beneath it was trying to escape. "I'm exactly who I said I am. Richard Blackwood. My family's been here for generations." He gestured to the symbols carved into the trees. "We've been tending this place, keeping the boundary." "Boundary to what?" "To the hollow space." Richard's voice had changed, resonating with a deeper timbre that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "The emptiness that hungers to be filled. We feed it, so it doesn't feed on the world." My hand closed around a fallen branch. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. "Stay back." Richard laughed, the sound echoing strangely through the clearing. "You still don't understand, do you? I'm not your enemy, Nathan. I'm your guide. I don't need a guide. I need to find my dog and get out of here. Your dog found what lurks in the hollow places. Or rather, it found him." Richard's form seemed to ripple, becoming momentarily transparent before solidifying again. The hollow man, the skin taker, the emptiness that walks. A cold certainty settled over me. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your Rex isn't Rex anymore." Richard's eyes fixed on something behind me. "Isn't that right, boy?" I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. Rex stood on the other side of the altar. Relief flooded through me at the sight of him, momentarily overwhelming my fear. But that relief quickly curdled into horror as I registered what was wrong. He was too still. His chest didn't move with breath. His eyes were fixed on me. But they weren't his eyes. They were black, pupilless orbs that reflected no light. And his mouth was stretched in what could only be described as a smile, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp. "Rex," I whispered. The thing that looked like my dog tilted its head at an impossible angle, the bones of its neck crackling like kindling in a fire. "Not anymore," Richard said softly from behind me. "The hollow man needed a skin, and your dog was convenient. But don't worry, there's room for more." I didn't think. I reacted. I swung the branch at the creature wearing Rex's form, connecting with enough force to knock it sideways. It let out a sound no dog could make. A high, keening wail that pierced my eardrums like needles. I didn't wait to see if it recovered. I turned and ran, blindly crashing through the undergrowth away from the clearing, away from Richard and the thing that had been Rex. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but terror drove me forward. Behind me, I heard pursuit, the crashing of something moving through the forest with unnatural speed, and voices. Richard's calling my name in that resonant, otherworldly tone. And another sound, a grotesque parody of Rex's bark, distorted and wrong. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. When I finally stumbled into another small clearing, I realized with horror that I was lost. The dense forest looked the same in every direction. I couldn't tell which way would lead back to the main trail. My watch had stopped again. The face showed 3:14 p.m., the same time I'd noted at the creek the day before. My compass spun uselessly, the needle rotating in continuous circles. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but that brought little comfort. I needed to find my way out of this place before nightfall. I studied the position of the sun, barely visible through the canopy, and chose a direction that I hoped would lead uphill, back toward the junction with the main trail. I had been walking for perhaps 20 minutes when I heard a familiar jingling sound. "Nathan!" The voice came from behind me, Rex's voice, but wrong. It was Rex's vocal cords being manipulated to form human words, the sound grating and unnatural. I didn't turn around. I kept walking, faster now. "Nathan, look at me." Against every instinct, I glanced back. The thing wearing Rex's skin stood about 10 yards behind me. In the dappled forest light, it almost looked normal, a beloved pet waiting for his owner. But then it smiled again, that terrible, too wide grin that no dog's face was meant to form. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "To be filled." The words came from Rex's mouth, but the voice was changing, becoming more human with each syllable. "So empty inside, for so long. Need a skin that fits better." It took a step forward, and I saw that its movements were becoming smoother, more coordinated, as if it was learning how to operate Rex's body. "Stay away from me," I warned, raising the branch I still clutched. "But you brought me a gift, Nathan." Another step. "You came back. You called to me." I called for Rex, and Rex answered. Part of him is still here. It tapped its head with a paw, the gesture horrifyingly human. "Enough to remember you. Enough to want to be with his master." "You're not Rex," I said, though tears stung my eyes. "Rex is gone." Not gone. Changed. It cocked its head again, that unnatural angle that made bones crackle. "Just as you will change. The hollow man needs a better skin. A human skin." I ran again, no longer caring about direction, only escape. The thing that had been Rex followed, moving with increasing coordination and speed. I could hear it gaining on me, that jingling of tags. How was that possible when I had the tags in my pocket, growing louder? The forest blurred around me as I ran. Trees seemed to move, reshaping the path ahead, sometimes blocking my way, forcing me to veer in new directions. I was being herded, I realized, driven toward some destination not of my choosing. When I burst through a tangle of undergrowth and found myself back at the creekside clearing, I knew I'd been manipulated. Richard waited there, sitting calmly on a boulder beside the water. "You can't run from the hollow, from Nathan," he said as I staggered to a halt, gasping for breath. "None of us can. My family has been its caretaker for generations, ensuring it gets what it needs." "Human sacrifices?" I spat the words. Richard shook his head. "Not exactly. The hollow man doesn't want death. It wants life. It wants to experience the world through skin that can feel." The jingling drew closer, and Rex, or the thing wearing his form, emerged from the trees. It moved differently now, almost upright, its back legs stretched unnaturally. "What is it?" I demanded, shifting to keep both Richard and the creature in my sight. An emptiness that gained awareness. A hollow place that learned to covet substance. Richard's form rippled again, momentarily revealing something beneath that human exterior, something dark and void-like. "I carry a piece of it within me, as my father did, and his father before him. That's our burden as Blackwoods, but it grows hungry for new experiences, new skin." The creature that had been Rex was changing as Richard spoke. Its form bulged and shifted, bones cracking audibly as they realigned. It was attempting to stand on its hind legs, its front paws stretching, fingers, not paws now, but malformed, elongated digits, reaching toward me. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "No god will help you here," Richard said. "This place was ancient before any god walked these mountains." I backed toward the creek, mind racing. The water. Perhaps there was something about the water. The creature had remained on the other side of the creek when it confronted me, and Richard sat beside it, but not in it. Without warning, I splashed into the creek, the cold water soaking my boots and jeans. The effect was immediate. Both Richard and the transforming creature recoiled, and an inhuman scream tore from Rex's distorted throat. "Water," I realized aloud. "Running water. You can't cross it, can you?" Richard's face contorted with rage. "This changes nothing. You have to leave the creek eventually." But his reaction had confirmed my theory. I began moving upstream, staying in the middle of the flow where the water reached mid-thigh. Richard and the creature paced along the bank, keeping pace but maintaining their distance from the water. "You think this will save you?" Richard called after me. "The creek ends, and night is coming." I ignored him, focusing on my footing in the slippery creek bed. If I could follow the water long enough, it might lead me out of this warped version of the forest, back to reality. It was my only hope. The creek wound through the forest, sometimes widening into shallow pools, other times narrowing to the point where I had to squeeze between rocks. All the while, my stalkers kept pace on the bank, sometimes visible, sometimes hidden by foliage, but always present. The creature continued its grotesque transformation, Rex's body elongating, twisting into something neither canine nor human. As Richard had warned, daylight began to fade far too quickly. The same unnatural acceleration of time I'd experienced before was happening again. My watch remained frozen at 3:14 p.m., but the forest darkened around me as if hours had passed in minutes. The gurgling of the creek changed ahead, the sound becoming more resonant. I rounded a bend and saw why. The creek spilled into a small but deep pool before continuing through a narrow gap between boulders. I would have to swim or leave the water and go around. Richard and the creature awaited me on both sides of the pool, as if they'd anticipated my dilemma. "End of the line, Nathan," Richard called. "Time to embrace the hollow." The thing that had once been Rex had completed its transformation. It stood on two legs now, its body a nightmarish amalgamation of canine and human features, elongated limbs, distended jaw, skin stretched too tight over a frame that had grown beyond its capacity. Only its eyes remained unchanged, those bottomless black pools that reflected nothing. I knew I couldn't go back. My only options were forward through the deep pool, or onto the bank and into their clutches. I chose the water. The pool was colder than the creek, the temperature dropping so rapidly that it stole my breath when I plunged in. The shock of it nearly made me gasp underwater, but I controlled the reflex and swam toward the gap in the rocks where the creek continued. Something grabbed my ankle. I kicked frantically, breaking the surface to gulp air before being yanked down again. Through the murky water, I saw hands, too many hands, reaching up from the bed of the pool, emerging from the silt. Pale, bloated things with elongated fingers that clutched at my legs and clothing. I fought against their grip, using the branch I still somehow clutched to strike at them. One hand shattered like brittle clay, but three more took its place. They were pulling me deeper, toward a darker patch in the pool's center. A hole, I realized. A hollow place beneath the water. With desperate strength born of pure terror, I tore free of their grasp, leaving scraps of my jeans behind. I surfaced again, lungs burning, and lunged for the rock gap where the creek flowed out. I barely squeezed through, the rough stone tearing at my skin, and emerged on the other side, gasping and trembling. The creek continued, winding downhill through increasingly normal-looking forest. Behind me, inhuman shrieks echoed through the gap, but nothing followed. I stayed in the creek, moving as quickly as the slippery rocks would allow until the water widened and shallowed into a familiar stretch. With a shock of relief, I recognized where I was, less than a half mile from the main trail junction, in a part of the creek I'd passed on my first day. The forest around me looked normal now, autumn colors vibrant in the late afternoon light, birds calling, no sense of that oppressive wrongness that had permeated the hollow. My watch had started running again, showing the correct time of 5:37 p.m. I staggered out of the water and up toward the main trail, half expecting Richard or the hollow man to appear at any moment. But the forest remained peacefully ordinary around me. When I reached the junction where the hollow trail should have branched off, I found only unbroken forest. No trail, no wooden sign. I didn't question this miracle. I simply turned toward the trailhead where my car waited and walked as quickly as my exhausted body would allow. It was full dark by the time I reached my car. I threw my soaked pack in the trunk, climbed behind the wheel, and drove without stopping until I reached the first motel outside the park boundaries. I paid for a room, showered in water hot enough to scald, and then sat on the bed, shaking as the events of the past 2 days played on endless loop in my mind. Rex was gone. That reality hit me in waves, grief mixing with horror as I remembered what had taken him, what had been wearing his skin when I last saw him. I found his tags in my pocket, the only proof that any of it had been real. I've spent the last 6 months trying to understand what happened in Linville Gorge. I've researched the history of the area, looking for any mention of Blackwood lumber or strange disappearances. I found only fragments, a brief reference to a logging operation that closed after several workers went missing in 1963, local legends about hollow men that steal the forms of animals and occasionally people, historical accounts of Cherokee warnings about certain valleys where the boundary between worlds was thin. I haven't returned to the wilderness. I'm not sure I ever will. Sometimes, on the edge of sleep, I think I hear jingling tags and the click of claws on hardwood. On those nights, I leave every light in my apartment burning until dawn. But the worst moments are when I catch myself in the mirror and, just for an instant, see something behind my eyes. Something dark and hollow, watching the world through a skin that isn't its own. Something that followed me home from the trail. Something that's waiting for its chance to fully emerge. I dream of Rex almost every night. In these dreams, he's whole and healthy and himself again, leading me along sun-dappled forest paths far from the hollow trail. But these pleasant dreams inevitably twist. The sky darkens too quickly, the trees press in, and Rex turns to me with those black, empty eyes and that terrible stretched smile. He speaks in Richard Blackwood's voice. "There's room for more in the hollow places, Nathan." I wake, gasping, drenched in sweat, and reach instinctively for the baseball bat I now keep beside my bed. I've tried to move on, to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. I return to work, though my colleagues note how distracted I've become, how I flinch at unexpected sounds and stare too long at shadows. My therapist believes I'm suffering from PTSD triggered by a traumatic wilderness experience and the loss of a beloved pet. She's not entirely wrong. What she doesn't know, what I can never tell her, is that I'm being hunted. 3 times now, I've spotted Richard Blackwood in public places. Once at a grocery store, watching me from the end of an aisle. Once on a crowded sidewalk, his face momentarily visible in a sea of strangers, and, most recently, standing across the street from my apartment building in the rain, his figure unnaturally still as water streamed off him. He never approaches, never speaks. Just watches with that same pitying smile, his form sometimes rippling at the edges, revealing glimpses of the void that inhabits him. And sometimes at night I hear scratching at my door. Not the eager pawing of a dog wanting to be let in, but something more deliberate. Something with fingers instead of paws. Something that knows how to wait. Last week I found a symbol carved into my apartment door, the same circle with radiating lines I'd seen on the trees in Linville Gorge. I covered it with duct tape and reported vandalism to the building manager. But the next morning, the tape was gone and the symbol had deepened, as if carved by something stronger than a knife. I've started researching ways to protect myself. Salt lines across thresholds and windowsills, iron nails driven into door frames, protective symbols from 6 spiritual traditions drawn in hidden places throughout my home. I don't know what might work against the Hollow Man, but I have to try something. The most effective deterrent I've found, oddly enough, is water. I keep spray bottles filled with creek water, collected from a stream as far from Linville Gorge as I could manage, in every room. Twice now, I've awakened to the sound of movement in my apartment and glimpsed a distorted shadow slipping along the wall, only to spray it with creek water and watch it recoil, hissing, before dissolving into the darkness. But I know these are just temporary measures. The Hollow Man is patient. It has existed for generations. perhaps centuries. It can afford to wait for my vigilance to falter. Sometimes I think about returning to Linville Gorge, to the hollow trail. If I could even find it again, perhaps there's a way to end this, to seal whatever boundary Richard Blackwood's family had been maintaining. Or perhaps that's exactly what the Hollow Man wants, to lure me back to its domain where it's strongest. I've considered reaching out to others who might have experienced similar phenomena, but the risk of sounding delusional is too great. Who would believe my story? Who would accept that a skinwalker had stolen my dog's form, that an ancient emptiness was trying to hollow me out and wear me like a suit? So I remain vigilant. I sleep in short bursts, never more than 2 hours at a time. I carry creek water wherever I go. I've installed motion-activated lights in every corner of my apartment, and I keep Rex's tags with me always, a reminder of what I've lost and what I'm fighting to prevent. Because that's the truth I can barely admit to myself. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about revenge. Something took Rex from me, twisted him into an abomination and discarded him when he was no longer useful. If there's any way to make the Hollow Man suffer for that, I'll find it. In the meantime, I watch my reflection carefully for signs of change. I monitor my movements, my reactions, searching for any hint that something else is guiding my actions. And I keep a journal, this journal documenting everything, so that if the Hollow Man does take me, perhaps someone will find these words and understand. If you're reading this and you've experienced something similar, know that you're not alone. But also know this: stay away from unmarked trails. Be wary of friendly strangers in the wilderness, and if your dog, or any animal, starts acting strangely, watching you too intently, moving in ways that seem almost but not quite natural, run. Run, and don't look back, because the hollow places are hungry, and they're spreading, and they wear familiar faces when they hunt. My name is Nathan Webb. This happened in October 2024, and I don't know how much longer I'll remain myself. My name is Marcus Fletcher. This happened in October of 2024. I'm writing this down so that if anyone finds my body, they'll know what to look for, and who. I was 32 when I decided to disconnect from the world. Software development has a way of consuming you, bit by bit, line by line, until your thoughts fragment into snippets of code even in your dreams. The burnout had been building for months. Missed deadlines, midnight debugging sessions, a boss who thought weekends were just another work day. When I finally snapped during a board meeting, hurling my laptop across the conference room while shouting obscenities about our impossible timeline, HR suggested I take some personal time. That's how Rusty and I ended up headed for Linville Gorge Wilderness in western North Carolina. My loyal German Shepherd mix had been the only consistent thing in my life for the past 6 years. He deserved better than the 20-minute walks between Zoom calls. "Just you and me, buddy," I said, scratching behind his ears as we drove west from Charlotte. 3 days of hiking, 2 nights camping under the stars. Linville Gorge isn't called the Grand Canyon of the East for nothing. It's one of the most rugged areas in the Appalachians, 12,000 acres of wilderness with steep walls plunging nearly 2,000 feet to the Linville River below. No cell service, limited trail markers, perfect for someone wanting to disconnect. I'd chosen a difficult loop trail that would take us past Wiseman's View and the rock formations known as the Chimneys. The ranger at the information center raised her eyebrows when I mentioned I'd be hiking it alone. "Just you and the dog?" She glanced at Rusty, who sat patiently by my side. "You've got your permit, but I should warn you, it's easy to get turned around out there. The trails aren't always clear. I've done my research." I patted my backpack. "Got maps, compass, GPS. We'll be fine." She hesitated, then pushed a paper map across the counter. "Take this too. Sometimes electronics get unreliable out there. The gorge has its quirks." I thanked her and headed back to my car where I double-checked my gear. Tent, sleeping bag, water purifier, first aid kit, 3 days of food for me, 2 for Rusty, knife, headlamp, rain gear, everything a prepared hiker needs. The trailhead parking lot was nearly empty when we arrived, just 2 other cars. October weekdays meant fewer tourists. The air had that distinct fall crispness, leaves just beginning to turn gold and crimson. Rusty's excitement was palpable as I clipped on his harness. "Ready for an adventure, buddy?" He answered with an enthusiastic bark, and we set off. The first few miles were exactly what I needed. The exertion of climbing, the rhythm of my boots on the trail, the quiet broken only by birdsong and the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. My mind started to unclench, thoughts of code and deadlines fading with each step deeper into the wilderness. Around noon, we reached a stunning overlook. The gorge spread below us, a vast gash in the landscape. The river, a silver thread in its depths. I sat on a boulder, shared some jerky with Rusty, and felt more at peace than I had in months. That's when I noticed the first oddity. My GPS showed us 2 miles east of where we should have been, placing us somewhere off-trail in the middle of a steep drop. I restarted the device, but the glitch persisted. "Old school it is," I muttered, pulling out the ranger's map. We continued along the ridge, following the trail as it wound toward Wiseman's View. By mid-afternoon, we'd made good progress. That's when I saw the first set of carvings. A series of strange symbols had been cut deep into the bark of a massive oak tree beside the trail. They weren't trail markers. I'd seen those, simple colored blazes painted on trees. These were intricate patterns, swirling designs that seemed to form faces if you looked at them from certain angles. I ran my fingers over the grooves. They felt fresh, the wood still pale where it had been cut. "Vandals," I said to Rusty, who was sniffing around the base of the tree. "Some people have no respect." We continued hiking, but now I noticed more carved trees, appearing at irregular intervals along the trail. Some symbols reminded me of ancient runes. Others looked almost like distorted human figures. All gave me a vague sense of unease. By late afternoon, we reached the area where I'd planned to camp for the night. A small clearing about half a mile from the main trail, near a stream for water. As I set up the tent, Rusty grew agitated, pacing and whining. "What's wrong, boy?" He stared into the dense forest surrounding our camp, hackles raised. I looked but saw nothing unusual among the trees. Still, I trusted Rusty's instincts. I kept my knife within easy reach as I prepared dinner. Night falls quickly in the mountains in October. As darkness closed in, I built a small fire and settled beside it with my book. Rusty finally relaxed enough to lie down, though he remained alert, ears perking at every sound from the forest. That's when I heard the whistling. A faint, tuneless melody drifting through the trees, sometimes seeming to come from the east, sometimes from the west. Rusty bolted upright, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Hello," I called. "Someone there?" The whistling stopped. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the crackling of my fire. 10 minutes later, it started again, closer this time. I reached for my flashlight, sweeping its beam through the trees. "I've got a dog here," I called, trying to sound authoritative despite the tremor in my voice. A branch snapped about 50 yards away. Rusty barked, lunging toward the sound before I grabbed his harness. "Hello," a man's voice called back. "Sorry if I startled you. I'm a bit turned around out here." A figure emerged from the darkness, a tall, lean man in his 40s with weathered features and a short beard. He carried a high-end backpack and trekking poles. "Name's Elias," he said, approaching the firelight. Elias Blackwood was heading for the chimneys, but this damn fog rolled in. Lost the trail about an hour ago. There had been no fog when I set up camp, but looking past him, I could see wisps of mist now curling between the trees. "Marcus Fletcher," I replied, "and this is Rusty." Rusty was still growling, straining against my grip on his harness. This was unusual. He typically loved people. "Not a dog person, I guess," Elias chuckled, keeping his distance. Mind if I warm up by your fire? I can pitch my tent nearby." Something about the situation felt off, but I couldn't just send the guy back into the dark woods. "Sure," I said. "There's room in this clearing." Elias set up his tent with practiced efficiency, then joined me by the fire. He declined my offer of food, saying he'd already eaten. As we talked, I learned he was from Asheville, an experienced hiker who claimed to have covered most of the trails in western North Carolina. "But Linville Gorge is special," he said, staring into the flames. "There's something primal about it. The locals have stories, you know." "What kind of stories?" His eyes, reflecting the firelight, seemed to gleam with an unnatural intensity. "The Cherokee called this place Ese Huage, where the spirit and body separate. They believed it was a thin place, a boundary between worlds." I'd never been superstitious, but sitting there in the darkness with strange symbols carved in trees and fog creeping through the forest, those words sent a chill through me. "Then there are the disappearances," Elias continued casually. "Disappearances?" "Hikers, every few years. They come into the gorge and never come out." He shrugged. "People get lost, make mistakes. Nature doesn't forgive carelessness." I found myself wondering if inviting this stranger to share my campsite had been one of those mistakes. Eventually, we both turned in for the night. I kept Rusty in the tent with me, his body warm against my side. Outside, the fog had thickened, muffling sounds. Just before I drifted off, I heard it again, that tuneless whistling circling our campsite, but exhaustion overcame my unease, and I fell into a fitful sleep. I dreamed of running through the forest, pursued by something I couldn't see. In the dream, Rusty was gone and I was alone. Trees with human faces watched as I passed, their wooden eyes following my desperate flight. When I woke, gasping, my watch read 3:17 a.m. Except that couldn't be right. The hands were moving backward. Rusty was sitting up, staring at the tent wall, a continuous low growl vibrating through him. Outside, something was moving around our campsite. The footsteps were too heavy for a deer, too deliberate for a bear. They circled the tent once, twice, then stopped directly outside the entrance. I held my breath, one hand on Rusty's collar, the other clutching my knife. A shadow fell across the tent fabric, a human silhouette, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin. It stood there, motionless for what felt like hours, but might have been minutes. Then, a whisper. "Marcus." My name in a voice like dry leaves scraping stone. I bit down on my knuckles to keep from making a sound. "I can smell your fear, Marcus." The shadow moved away. By the time dawn broke, I'd convinced myself it was just a vivid nightmare. But when I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, I found my backpack open, its contents strewn across the ground. My food was missing, not torn open and scattered like an animal would do. Just gone. Elias emerged from his tent, looking annoyingly well-rested. "Everything okay? Heard some noises in the night." Before I could answer, Rusty started barking frantically at something by the edge of the clearing. I walked over to investigate and froze. Hanging from a low branch was a small bundle of twigs bound with what looked like hair. Dark hair like mine. Below it, scratched into the dirt, were the same strange symbols I'd seen carved into trees along the trail. "Just local kids playing pranks," Elias said suddenly beside me. I hadn't heard him approach. "They come up here sometimes trying to scare hikers with that Blair Witch stuff. Kids? We're miles from any road." Elias didn't respond, just stared at the bundle with an expression I couldn't read. "I need to get more food," I said finally. "Mine's gone." "Happy to share," he offered. "I always pack extra." I was reluctant to accept anything from him after the previous night, but practical needs won out. We ate a breakfast of his protein bars and dried fruit. I tried to watch him carefully, but he seemed perfectly normal in the daylight. Just another hiker with well-worn gear and easy conversation. Maybe my imagination had been working overtime. We decided to hike together to the chimneys, agreeing that having a companion on the difficult terrain made sense. I wasn't entirely comfortable with this arrangement, but I also didn't want to be alone after what had happened. Besides, it would be easier to keep an eye on him if he was with me. As we hiked, I noticed Elias never drank water or seemed to tire. The trail grew more challenging. Steep inclines, narrow passages between massive rocks, areas where we had to scramble using both hands. Through it all, he maintained the same steady pace, often waiting for me to catch up. Around midday, we reached a section where the trail skirted a sheer cliff edge. The view was breathtaking, the gorge falling away beneath us, the river a distant ribbon. But something caught my attention on a narrow ledge about 30 feet below, a splash of color that didn't belong. "Look," I said, pointing. "Is that a backpack?" Elias glanced where I was pointing. "Probably. People drop stuff all the time." But it wasn't just a backpack. As I looked closer, I could see an entire campsite setup. A tent collapsed on its side, sleeping bag half unfurled, cooking gear scattered across the ledge. It looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. "We should report that when we get back," I said. "Someone might be in trouble." Elias shrugged. "If you want, but like I said, people disappear here sometimes. Nature taking its course." Something in his tone made me look at him sharply. His expression was neutral, but there was a coldness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something shift behind his features, like another face trying to push through from beneath his skin. I blinked, and he was just Elias again, adjusting his pack straps. "Should keep moving if we want to reach the chimneys before afternoon storms roll in." We continued hiking, but now my every nerve was on alert. Rusty stayed close to me, still wary of Elias. I found myself watching the man's movements, looking for anything unusual. The way he walked seemed too fluid sometimes, his stride too long. And when had he last taken a breath? I couldn't remember seeing his chest rise and fall. We reached the chimneys, impressive rock formations jutting from the ridgeline, by early afternoon. The view was spectacular, but I could barely appreciate it. Dark clouds were gathering to the west, exactly as Elias had predicted. We needed to find a campsite. "I know a good spot," Elias said. "Protected, near water, about a mile ahead." Every instinct told me to make an excuse, to separate from this man, but a rumble of thunder decided for me. We needed shelter, and I had no better option. The campsite was indeed perfect, a natural hollow shielded by rock outcroppings with a small spring bubbling nearby. As I set up my tent, I noticed more symbols carved into these rocks, fresher looking than the ones we'd passed on the trail. "These carvings are everywhere," I remarked casually, watching Elias's reaction. "Old as the mountains," he replied, not looking up from his own tent setup. "People have been passing through here for thousands of years. Everyone leaves their mark." But these didn't look old, and they matched exactly the bundle that had been left outside my tent that morning. As evening approached, the storm hit with unexpected ferocity. Rain lashed down, wind whipping through the trees. We retreated to our respective tents. I kept Rusty close, my knife within reach. The storm masked all other sounds, leaving me feeling isolated despite Elias's tent being just 30 feet away. I must have dozed off despite my anxiety. When I woke, the storm had passed, and moonlight filtered through the tent fabric. My watch had stopped completely. Rusty was gone. Panic surged through me as I scrambled out of the tent. "Rusty!" I called, scanning the darkened campsite. How had he gotten out without waking me? The tent door had been zipped shut. A sound caught my attention, a soft whimpering from the direction of the spring. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed toward it. Rusty was there, standing rigid, staring into the small pool formed by the spring. When I reached him, he didn't acknowledge me, just continued staring at the water. I followed his gaze and nearly dropped my flashlight. Reflected in the pool was not the night sky and surrounding rocks, but a different scene entirely. What looked like a cave, its walls covered in the same symbols I'd been seeing. In the center of this reflected cave, a figure moved, twisted, elongated, its limbs bent at impossible angles. It appeared to be skinning something. I stumbled backward, pulling Rusty with me. When I looked again, the water showed only ordinary reflections. Beautiful night after the storm. I spun around. Elias stood a few feet away. I hadn't heard him approach. Again. "Just getting water," I managed to say, my voice strangled. "Spring water's special here," he said, moving closer. "Full of minerals. Good for you." In the moonlight, his face looked different. The proportions slightly wrong, as if his features had been rearranged. I told myself it was just shadows playing tricks. "We head back tomorrow, right?" I asked, trying to sound casual while slowly backing toward my tent. Rusty pressed against my leg. "Change of plans," Elias said. "I thought we might go deeper. There's a place few people know about. Very transformative." "I need to get back," I insisted. "Work on Monday." "Time works differently in the gorge," he said, his voice changing, becoming deeper, resonant. "Didn't you notice? Your watch stopped. Phone too, I bet." He was right. My devices had failed, but that was just electronics being unreliable in the wilderness, like the ranger had warned. Wasn't it? "I'm turning in," I said. "Long day tomorrow." I retreated to my tent, heart hammering. Once inside, I checked my backpack. My spare food, Elias's food that he'd shared, was gone, though I was certain I'd secured it in my pack. Now I had nothing but a protein bar and some beef jerky I'd kept in my pocket. That night, the dreams returned. More vivid, more terrifying. I was running again. But this time I could see what chased me. A tall, emaciated figure with too many joints, its skin stretched tight over a frame that wasn't quite human. It wore Elias's clothes, carried Elias's backpack, but its face was just a blank expanse of skin with a vertical slit where the mouth should be. I woke to Rusty's growling. Dawn was breaking, gray light seeping into the tent. Outside, someone was moving around the campsite, the sounds deliberate, unhurried. "Marcus," called Elias's voice, "you should see this sunrise." I didn't respond. Through a small gap in the tent flap, I could see him standing with his back to me, looking east. His proportions seemed wrong. His arms too long, his neck somehow longer than it had been yesterday. He turned slightly, and I ducked back, but not before I caught a glimpse of his profile. His nose protruded too far, and his jawline had become unnaturally angular. I needed to get away from him. As quietly as possible, I packed my essential gear: water, map, compass, knife, the little food I had left. Rusty watched me, alert but silent, as if he understood the need for stealth. I waited until Elias moved away from the campsite, saying something about checking the spring. Then Rusty and I slipped out of the tent and headed in the opposite direction, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. We'd gone perhaps half a mile when I heard it, that tuneless whistling, coming from somewhere behind us. He knew we'd left. "Run," I whispered to Rusty, and we broke into a sprint. The trail here was treacherous, narrow, with loose rocks and exposed roots. In my haste, I lost my footing. The fall was bad. My ankle twisted beneath me with a sickening pop, and I slid several feet down a steep embankment before catching myself on a sapling. Pain shot up my leg. Sprained, not broken, I hoped, but I couldn't run now. Rusty had scrambled down after me. I dragged myself to a hollow beneath a fallen tree. Not great cover, but the best available. The whistling grew louder, then stopped. From my hiding place, I could see the trail above. Elias appeared, moving with that too fluid gait that no longer pretended to be human. He paused directly above my hiding spot. "I can smell your blood, Marcus," he called, his voice now a distorted version of what it had been. "You're hurt. Let me help you." I held my breath. Rusty pressed against me, trembling but silent. Elias, or whatever he was, began descending the embankment, moving in a horrible sideways scuttle that no human could manage. I gripped my knife, knowing it would be useless against him but having no other option. That's when I heard voices, human voices, coming from further down the trail. Hikers. Elias froze, then retreated up the embankment with inhuman speed. I heard him greeting the newcomers with the same friendly demeanor he'd first shown me. It was my chance. While he was distracted, I crawled further beneath the fallen tree, discovering that it concealed a small space where the ground had eroded away, almost a tiny cave. Rusty and I squeezed inside. From this shelter, I listened as Elias chatted with the hikers, a young couple who'd mentioned they were doing a day hike to Wiseman's View. He was warning them about a dangerous man with a dog he'd encountered. "Threatened me with a knife," I heard him say. "Seemed unstable. Park rangers are looking for him." The blood ran cold in my veins. He was turning potential help against me. After the hikers moved on, promising to report me if seen, silence fell. Hours passed. My ankle throbbed, but I didn't dare move. Rusty remained vigilant beside me. By late afternoon, I had to make a decision. We had limited water, almost no food, and I needed medical attention for my ankle. But which way was safe? Elias could be waiting on the trail in either direction. I decided our best chance was to abandon the trail entirely, to bushwhack straight down toward the river. It would be arduous and dangerous, especially with my injury, but if we could reach the river, we could follow it out of the wilderness. As dusk approached, we emerged from hiding and began our descent. The slope was steep, forcing me to half-slide, half-crawl between trees. Rusty stayed close, sometimes helping me balance. Every step was agony for my ankle, but fear drove me onward. Night fell, but I didn't dare use my flashlight. We continued by moonlight, the gorge walls looming above us. I tried to keep the sound of distant rushing water as our guide. Around midnight, we reached a small ledge and paused to rest. That's when I noticed it. A faint glow below us, what looked like firelight coming from a cave opening. Shelter, potentially, but also risk. Desperation won. We made our way carefully down to the cave entrance. The interior opened into a surprisingly large chamber. A small fire burned in a stone circle at its center. The walls were covered in familiar symbols, the same ones I'd been seeing carved into trees. They seemed to shift and change in the firelight, forming faces, figures, scenes of violence. But what captured my attention was the structure at the back of the cave, a crude altar of stacked stones. Atop it lay items I recognized with horror, a watch like mine, a knife similar to one in my pack, a collar that could have been Rusty's twin. And scattered on the ground around the altar were bones. Small animal bones, yes, but also larger ones, human-sized. "Do you like my collection?" The voice came from behind me. I turned to see Elias standing in the cave entrance, his silhouette blocking the moonlight. But he didn't look like Elias anymore. His body had elongated, joints protruding at bizarre angles. His face had stretched, the skin pulled tight across distorted features. That vertical slit of a mouth opened, revealing row upon row of needle-like teeth. "What are you?" I whispered. "The Shawnee called us skinwalkers," he said, his voice a rasping parody of human speech. "The Cherokee had another name. The white settlers called us devils." He took a step forward. "Names don't matter. I've worn many skins, worn many names. Elias is just the latest." I backed away, limping badly now. Rusty placed himself between me and the creature, hackles raised, a continuous growl rumbling from his chest. "I've been watching you since you entered my gorge," the thing that wasn't Elias continued. "You have strong skin, resilient. It will last me many seasons." "The others," I managed to say. "The missing hikers." His mouth slit stretched in what might have been a smile. "Some I wore, others I consumed. Their fear makes the meat sweeter." He lunged with blinding speed. Rusty intercepted him, teeth sinking into the creature's forearm. It made a sound no human throat could produce, a high-pitched screech that seemed to come from everywhere at once. With impossible strength, it hurled Rusty against the cave wall. My dog yelped in pain, then lay still. "No!" I screamed, rage overcoming terror. I drew my knife and charged. The fight was brief and brutal. The creature was stronger, faster, but I had desperation and fury on my side. Its claws raked my chest and arms. I stabbed blindly, feeling the knife connect with something solid, then sink deep. The creature shrieked again, a sound that made my ears ring and vision blur. It staggered backward, black ichor pouring from a wound in its chest. The substance smoked where it hit the cave floor. I saw my opening and took it, diving past the wounded creature toward the cave entrance. I scooped up Rusty's limp form as I passed. He was alive, but badly hurt. The thing that wasn't Elias roared in fury, lunging after us, but its movements were now jerky, uncoordinated. My knife remained embedded in its chest, the handle protruding grotesquely. I scrambled outside, the weight of Rusty and my injured ankle making escape difficult. Behind me, the creature kept coming, but slower now, dripping that smoking black fluid with each step. What happened next remains a blur in my memory. I remember half running, half falling down the steep gorge wall in darkness. I remember the creature's inhuman howls echoing through the night. I remember reaching the river, the cold shock of water as we crossed, Rusty cradled in my arms. Somehow, we made it. A fisherman found us the next morning, collapsed on the riverbank miles downstream. I was delirious with pain and exhaustion, covered in cuts and bruises. Rusty had 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung. They airlifted us out. The official report cited a bear attack. When I tried to tell them about Elias, about the cave with its altar of bones, they exchanged knowing looks. Later, a nurse told me they'd found no evidence of another person. My tent and gear were discovered at the campsite undisturbed. There was only one set of footprints, mine. But I know what I saw. I know what hunts in Linville Gorge. 6 months have passed. Rusty recovered, though he still startles at shadows. My physical wounds healed, leaving scars that raise questions I never answer truthfully. I dream about the gorge almost nightly. The cave, the symbols, the thing wearing Elias's skin. In the worst dreams, I'm not running from it anymore. I'm becoming it. 2 weeks ago, I found a small bundle of twigs bound with hair on my doorstep. My hair. It's found me. I'm writing this account so there will be some record, some warning. If you hike in Linville Gorge and meet a friendly man named Marcus Fletcher, run. It isn't me anymore. Whatever wears my skin is just borrowing it for a while. My name is Rebecca Mercer. I'm 32 years old. This happened in October of 2024. The first thing you should know about me is that I've always been cautious, methodical. I plan vacations months in advance, keep emergency supplies in my car, and never go hiking without checking the weather forecast 3 times. My girlfriend Eliza used to tease me about it, calling me her little squirrel because I was always preparing for winter. She thought it was cute. I don't think she finds it cute anymore. The Linville Gorge Wilderness in North Carolina had been on our bucket list for years. Known as the Grand Canyon of the East, it's a sprawling, rugged landscape of steep cliffs, dense forests, and the rushing Linville River cutting through ancient rock. The Burke County Wilderness is one of the most isolated areas in the eastern United States, some parts virtually unchanged since before European settlement. Eliza was the spontaneous one in our relationship. Where I was cautious, she was bold. Where I planned, she improvised. Her dark eyes would light up when describing some new adventure, and I'd feel my carefully constructed walls crumbling. She had a way of making the dangerous seem merely exciting. Maybe that's why, despite all my precautions, we still ended up in hell. "Come on, Beck," she had said 3 weeks ago, spinning in her office chair to face me. Her curly black hair was tied in a messy bun, strands falling around her face as she grinned. The team finished the Asheville project ahead of schedule. We've got a whole week free. Let's just go. To Linville? Ooh, what do you mean? Now? Without planning? I'd asked, alarm bells ringing. 4 of Eliza's co-workers from the architectural firm were going too. Marcus and his wife Dahlia, and the couple Jasper and Thomas. I'd met them all at company gatherings, but didn't know them well. It's perfect timing, Eliza insisted. The leaves are changing. We've talked about seeing it for years, and I've already got the permits. That was Eliza, already 3 steps ahead when it came to adventure, even as she forgot to pay the electric bill. What she didn't mention then was that the trip was partially a celebration. I would find that out later when it was too late. I checked the weather obsessively the entire week before we left. Clear skies forecasted, unusually warm for October. I packed extensively: first aid kit, emergency blankets, water purification tablets, bear spray, extra socks, battery packs for our phones. Eliza laughed as she watched me cram it all into my backpack. "We're not going to the moon, babe," she said, tossing a few items into her own pack with casual disregard. "The Linville Gorge is serious wilderness," I retorted. "People get lost there every year." "And that's why I'm bringing you," she said, kissing me sweetly. "My little squirrel will keep us safe." I didn't keep us safe. We met the others at the Kistler Memorial Highway trailhead on a crisp Friday morning. Marcus was tall and broad-shouldered, with a booming laugh that could probably scare away any wildlife within a half-mile radius. His wife, Dahlia, was petite and fair, quiet, but with an unexpected sarcastic streak. Jasper and Thomas had been together for years, both athletic and experienced hikers who often explored the Blue Ridge Mountains. "Rebecca, the planner," Marcus called out when we arrived, clapping me on the shoulder. "Eliza says you've brought enough supplies to survive the apocalypse." "Just the essentials," I mumbled, embarrassed. "Don't tease her," Dahlia chided her husband. "I'm glad someone's prepared." We started down the trail toward the gorge, spirits high. The autumn colors were breathtaking, crimson, gold, and burnished orange painting the landscape. The air had that distinctive fall crispness, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and distant wood smoke. Despite my apprehension about the hastily arranged trip, I felt myself relaxing. Maybe Eliza was right. Maybe I did worry too much. Around midday, we stopped for lunch at an overlook. The vast gorge spread beneath us, the river a distant silver thread. As we ate sandwiches, Marcus opened a bottle of champagne he'd somehow hauled in his pack. "What's this for?" I asked as he poured the bubbly liquid into collapsible cups. Eliza and her colleagues exchanged glances. Then she grinned. "We got it," she said, excitement making her voice tremble. "The Winston-Salem project. The big one we've been pursuing for months." "That's amazing," I said, genuinely happy for her. The architectural firm had been vying for this major contract, and it would mean job security and recognition for Eliza. But something in her expression told me there was more. "And," she continued, "they want me to lead the project team." The others cheered. I hugged her tightly, pride swelling in my chest. "That's incredible. Why didn't you tell me?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Because it means relocation to Winston-Salem, for at least 2 years." The celebration suddenly made sense. This wasn't just a spontaneous trip, it was a goodbye to her team in Asheville, and she hadn't told me. "We can talk about the details later," she whispered, seeing my expression. "Let's just enjoy this now, okay?" I nodded, forcing a smile, but something cold had settled in my stomach. 2 years of long distance, or me uprooting my life to follow her career. Again. I pushed the thought away as we continued hiking, descending deeper into the gorge. By late afternoon, we reached our planned campsite near the river. As the others set up tents, I explored a little, taking photos of the dramatic rock formations and the water rushing over smooth stones. Despite the turmoil of Eliza's announcement, the beauty of the place was undeniable. That's when I first saw her. Just a glimpse, really. An elderly woman on the opposite bank, standing motionless among the trees. She seemed out of place, too old to be hiking these difficult trails, especially alone. She wore what looked like a long, dark dress or coat, her white hair loose around her shoulders. I raised my hand in greeting, but she didn't respond. When I looked back after checking my camera settings, she was gone. "Did you see that woman?" I asked Thomas when I returned to camp. He looked up from hammering tent stakes. "What woman?" "Across the river. An older woman just standing there." Thomas shaded his eyes, looking across the water. "I don't see anyone. Would be strange, though. We haven't passed another soul all day." That evening, we gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and passing a flask of whiskey. The mood was jovial as Marcus recounted stories from previous company trips. I tried to join in, but kept glancing at the darkening forest across the river. Something about the old woman had unsettled me. "You know this area has its share of ghost stories," Jasper said, noticing my distraction. "They say this gorge is haunted." "Oh, here he goes," Thomas groaned but smiled affectionately at his husband. "I'm serious," Jasper insisted. "Local legend talks about the Gorge Hag. Supposedly, she was an old woman who lived alone in the gorge back in the 1800s. Some say she was a healer who helped lost hikers. Others say she was a witch who lured travelers to their deaths." Dahlia shivered dramatically. "Thank you for that lovely bedtime story." "It gets better," Jasper continued, lowering his voice theatrically. "They say she didn't really die, that she still wanders the gorge, appearing to hikers who are about to face danger." "Is she warning them or causing the danger?" I asked, thinking of the old woman I'd seen. Jasper shrugged. "Depends on the version. In some stories, she helps those who are kind and punishes those who disrespect the wilderness." "Well, we're all respectful nature lovers here," Marcus declared, crushing his beer can. "So, I guess we're safe." Eliza squeezed my hand, sensing my unease. "It's just stories, Beck. You know how these remote places collect legends." I nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the darkness beyond our fire's light. That night, I couldn't sleep. Eliza's revelation about Winston-Salem kept circling in my mind, along with the image of the old woman by the river. Around 2 a.m, I gave up and slipped out of our tent, careful not to wake Eliza. The night was clear, a blanket of stars overhead and a nearly full moon illuminating the gorge. I sat on a rock by the embers of our fire, wrapping my jacket tightly around me against the chill. The river murmured nearby, a constant, soothing sound. Then I heard it, a voice, soft and wavering, carried on the breeze. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, the words indistinct but the tone unmistakably mournful. I stood, turning slowly, scanning the moonlit landscape. "Hello," I called quietly, not wanting to wake the others. "Is someone there?" The voice faded, replaced by the normal sounds of the wilderness at night. I told myself it was just the wind, or the river over rocks, or my imagination working overtime. But deep down, I knew better. I returned to the tent and finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, only to be jarred awake by the morning light and sounds of activity in the camp. "Sleep well?" Eliza asked, kissing my forehead. "Not really," I admitted. "I thought I heard something strange in the night." "Probably just a raccoon raiding someone's pack," she said lightly. "Come on, everyone's having breakfast." I didn't tell her about the voice, or about seeing the old woman again, standing at the edge of our camp as I emerged from the tent, only to vanish when I blinked. It sounded too much like Jasper's ghost story, and I didn't want to seem foolish. Our plan for the day was to hike deeper into the gorge, exploring some of the less traveled paths. The weather remained perfect, sunny but cool, ideal for hiking. But as we gathered our day packs, I noticed Dahlia looking pale. "Are you feeling okay?" I asked her. She shook her head. "Not really. I had terrible nightmares and now I've got a splitting headache." "Do you want to stay at camp?" Marcus asked, concern etched on his face. "I can stay with you." "No, I don't want to ruin everyone's day," Dahlia insisted. I'll take some ibuprofen. I'm sure it'll pass." I offered her medication from my first aid kit, which she accepted gratefully. But as we set off, I noticed she was still unsteady, leaning on Marcus for support. The trail grew more challenging as we continued, narrowing and winding through dense underbrush. The cheerful conversation of earlier dwindled as we focused on navigating the difficult terrain. I found myself near the back of the group with Dahlia, who was moving slowly, her face drawn with pain. "We should go back," I told her quietly. "You're not well." "I'll be fine," she whispered, but her eyes were unfocused. "I just need to keep going." Ahead of us, the others had paused at a fork in the trail. Jasper was consulting a map while Thomas checked something on his phone. "No signal," Thomas reported. "GPS is acting weird too." "That's not uncommon out here," Jasper said. "The gorge walls can block signals, but I think we go left here." Marcus frowned. "Are you sure? I thought we were heading toward Babel Tower." "We are," Jasper insisted. "Trust me, I've studied the trails." As they debated, I noticed Dahlia swaying slightly beside me. Before I could react, her eyes rolled back and she collapsed. I barely caught her before she hit the ground. "Dahlia!" Marcus shouted, rushing back to us. The others quickly gathered around as I checked her pulse and breathing. "She's burning up," I said, feeling her forehead. "This isn't just a headache. She needs medical attention." "We have to get her back to the trailhead," Eliza said. "Can you carry her? Marcus?" He nodded grimly, lifting his wife's limp form. "Lead the way." But when we turned to retrace our steps, nothing looked familiar. The trail we had just traveled seemed different somehow, narrower, more overgrown, as if it had transformed behind us. "This isn't right," Thomas said, voicing what we were all thinking. "We just came this way." Jasper checked his map again, confusion crossing his face. "Maybe we got turned around. Let's try the other fork." "No," I said firmly. "We need to go back the way we came. We don't have time to experiment with routes, not with Dahlia in this condition." We started back along what we thought was our original path, Marcus carrying Dahlia, who drifted in and out of consciousness. The light seemed to dim as we walked, though it was barely noon. The dense canopy overhead had somehow thickened, casting us into premature twilight. After an hour of walking, we should have reached our campsite. Instead, we found ourselves in an unfamiliar clearing surrounded by towering pines. No sign of the river, no sign of our tents. "This is impossible," Eliza muttered, a tremor in her voice. We followed the trail exactly. Thomas pulled out his phone again. Still no signal, and now my battery's nearly dead, even though I charged it fully last night. One by one, we checked our phones. All were mysteriously drained, the GPS apps showing our location jumping erratically across the map. "We need to stop and think," I said, trying to stay calm. "Marcus, lay Dahlia down here. I'll check her condition." As the others gathered wood for an emergency fire, I examined Dahlia. Her fever was dangerously high, her breathing shallow. When I lifted her eyelids, her pupils were dilated. Most worrying were the strange dark marks appearing on her arms, like bruises, but with an odd pattern that reminded me of branching veins. "How is she?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with fear. "Not good," I admitted. "Has she been like this before? Any medical conditions I should know about?" He shook his head. "She's always been healthy. This came out of nowhere." As Jasper got a small fire going, I wet a bandana with water from my bottle and laid it across Dahlia's forehead. It was a pitiful attempt at treatment, but I didn't know what else to do. "We need to get our bearings," Thomas said, spreading the map on the ground. "These trails are confusing, but they're all well marked. We can't be that lost." But as darkness fell with unnatural speed, a sense of dread settled over our group. Something was very wrong with these woods, with this place. The fire seemed to struggle against the encroaching darkness, its light barely reaching the tree line, and then I saw her again. The old woman, standing just beyond the circle of firelight. This time, I wasn't the only one who noticed. "Who's that?" Eliza whispered, gripping my arm. We all turned to look. The woman's face was deeply lined, her eyes sunken into her skull. Her white hair floated around her head as if underwater. She didn't speak, didn't move, just watched us with an unblinking gaze. "Hello?" Marcus called out, his voice breaking. "Can you help us? My wife is sick." The woman lifted one gnarled finger and pointed, not at us, but past us, deeper into the woods. Then she began to fade, becoming transparent until she disappeared completely. "What the hell was that?" Thomas gasped. "The Gorge Hag," Jasper whispered. "The legend is real." "That's ridiculous," Eliza snapped, but her voice trembled. "It was just someone hiking, or a trick of the light." "She was pointing somewhere," I said. "Maybe she was showing us the way out." "Or leading us deeper into a trap," Thomas countered. We argued in hushed voices while Marcus tended to Dahlia, whose condition was deteriorating rapidly. The strange marks had spread across her body, dark lines creeping up her neck. She muttered incoherently, occasionally crying out in pain. Finally, I made a decision. "We can't stay here. Dahlia needs help, and we're clearly lost." The woman was pointing that way. "I say we follow at first light." "And what if it's a trap?" Thomas asked. "Do you have a better idea?" I challenged. "We're lost, our GPS isn't working, and Dahlia might die if we don't get her to a hospital." No one did have a better idea. We agreed to take turns keeping watch through the night, though none of us said exactly what we were watching for. I took the first shift, sitting close to the fire and listening to the strange noises of the forest. The usual nighttime sounds, crickets, frogs, the occasional hoot of an owl, were absent. Instead, there was a heavy silence, occasionally broken by what sounded like distant whispering. About an hour into my watch, Dahlia began to convulse. I rushed to her side, calling for Marcus, who was instantly awake. We turned her on her side, making sure she couldn't swallow her tongue, but otherwise could only wait helplessly for the seizure to pass. When it finally did, Dahlia lay still, her breathing even more labored than before. The dark lines had reached her face now, creating a web-like pattern across her skin. "What's happening to her?" Marcus sobbed, cradling his wife's hand. I had no answer. Nothing in my first aid training had prepared me for this. As the others woke, disturbed by the commotion, a terrible realization dawned on me. The symptoms, the progression, it reminded me of something I'd read about mycotoxins, poisons produced by certain fungi. Had Dahlia somehow been exposed to a toxic mushroom? But when? And why was she the only one affected? Unless… "The drinking water," I said suddenly. "Dahlia, did you refill your bottle from the river yesterday?" Marcus looked up, confusion cutting through his grief. "Yes, in the afternoon when we first arrived." "Why?" "Did she use purification tablets?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. I don't think so. She said the water looked clean, and we were only using it for one day." I closed my eyes briefly. It was a rookie mistake, one that experienced hikers sometimes made when they got complacent. The Linville River might look pristine, but it could harbor all manner of pathogens and toxins. "I think she's been poisoned," I said as gently as possible. "Not deliberately, but from drinking contaminated water." "Then why isn't anyone else sick?" Eliza asked. "Because the rest of us used filtered water or tablets," I replied. "At least, I hope we all did." We looked at each other uneasily. The possibility of more of us falling ill hung in the air, unspoken but terrifying. At first light, though the gloomy forest barely brightened, we constructed a makeshift stretcher for Dahlia using jackets and sturdy branches. Marcus and Thomas would take turns carrying her. Our plan was simple: follow in the direction the old woman had pointed and hope to find a way out or someone who could help. As we prepared to leave, I noticed something strange about our campsite. The clearing where we had spent the night seemed smaller somehow, the trees closer than they had been. It was as if the forest was slowly closing in around us. We set off, the sense of being watched following us like a shadow. The trail, if it could be called that, was barely visible, just a slightly less overgrown path through the dense underbrush. We moved slowly, mindful of Dahlia's condition and the treacherous terrain. Hours passed, though it was hard to track time with our phones dead. The forest remained unnaturally quiet, no birds singing, no insects buzzing, just the sound of our labored breathing and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Eliza walked beside me, her earlier skepticism replaced by grim determination. "Do you think the old woman was real?" she whispered. "I don't know," I admitted, "but 4 of us saw her, and right now, following her direction is our only plan." "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Winston-Salem," she said suddenly. "I was afraid you'd be angry." I glanced at her, surprised by the timing of this conversation. "I'm not angry, just hurt that you made such a big decision without talking to me first. I know, She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening. "Do you hear that?" I listened. At first, I heard nothing unusual, just our footsteps and labored breathing. Then it came, the sound of a child's laughter, echoing through the trees. "Hello?" Jasper called out. "Is someone there?" The laughter came again, closer this time, followed by what sounded like running footsteps. "There's a kid out here," Thomas said incredulously. "Maybe there's a family camping nearby," Eliza suggested, hope brightening her voice. "They might have a radio or satellite phone." We veered toward the sound, Marcus and I carefully maneuvering Dahlia's stretcher through the dense underbrush. The child's laughter continued, always just ahead, leading us deeper into the woods. After about 20 minutes, we emerged into another clearing. In its center stood a small, dilapidated cabin. It looked ancient, its log walls sagging and its roof partially collapsed, but smoke rose from the stone chimney, suggesting occupancy. "Hello?" Marcus called out, his voice breaking with exhaustion and hope. "We need help." The cabin door creaked open slowly. We expected to see the source of the laughter, a child, perhaps with parents nearby. Instead, a tall, gaunt man emerged, his face partially obscured by a wild, untrimmed beard. He wore tattered clothes that might once have been hunting gear, now patched and dirty from years of use. And he held a shotgun, pointed steadily in our direction. "State your business," he growled, his voice rough as if rarely used. Marcus stepped forward, his hands raised placatingly. "Please. My wife is very ill. We got lost and need help getting back to the trailhead." The man's eyes, a piercing, unnatural blue, swept over our group, lingering on Dahlia's prone form. Something like recognition flickered across his weathered face. "The river sickness," he muttered. "She drank from the Linville." "Yes," I confirmed, surprised. "We think so. Do you know what it is?" He lowered his shotgun slightly. "Know it well enough. Lost my own wife to it 30 years back." He jerked his head toward the cabin. "Bring her inside." Relief washed over us as we carefully carried Dahlia into the cabin. The interior was sparse but surprisingly clean, with a wood-burning stove, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. Herbs hung from the rafters, filling the small space with a pungent aroma. "Put her there," the man directed, pointing to the bed. As Marcus and Thomas laid Dahlia down, the man busied himself at the stove, where a pot simmered. "My name's Ezekiel Harper," he said without turning around. "Been living in these woods near 40 years now." "I'm Rebecca," I replied. "This is Eliza, Marcus, Thomas, and Jasper, and that's Dahlia on the bed. Thank you for helping us." Ezekiel grunted in acknowledgement. "Wasn't expecting company. Not many find their way to my cabin these days." He paused, stirring whatever was in the pot. "Though she must have led you here." "She?" Eliza questioned. "Do you mean the old woman we saw? The one who pointed us in this direction?" Ezekiel turned, his intense gaze settling on Eliza. "So, you've seen the hag. That's rare. Most don't live to tell about it." "Then she is real," Jasper breathed. "The legend. Real as you or me," Ezekiel confirmed. "Though not in the way you might think. The gorge has its own rules, its own ways. The hag is part of it. Guardian, judge, warden. She appears to those the gorge has chosen." "Chosen for what?" Thomas asked, skepticism clear in his voice. Ezekiel didn't answer directly. Instead, he ladled some liquid from the pot into a cup and brought it to Dahlia's bedside. "She needs to drink this. All of it." Marcus eyed the steaming concoction suspiciously. "What is it?" "Medicine. Herbs that counteract the river poison. Won't cure her completely, but might buy her enough time to reach a hospital." Ezekiel's tone left no room for argument. Either she drinks it, or she dies before nightfall. Marcus hesitated only briefly before nodding. Together, they managed to get most of the liquid down Dahlia's throat. She coughed and sputtered, but swallowed enough that Ezekiel seemed satisfied. "Now we wait," he said, returning to the stove. "Might as well feed the rest of you while we're at it." As Ezekiel prepared a simple meal of beans and jerky, we took turns washing up using water from a barrel outside. The afternoon light filtered weakly through the cabin's small, grimy windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Over the meal, Ezekiel explained that he had once been a wildlife biologist, studying the unique ecosystem of the Linville Gorge. "Something happened 30 years ago," he said, his voice distant with memory. "Something changed the gorge. The water, the plants, the very air." "What do you mean, changed?" I asked. Ezekiel's piercing gaze met mine. "It woke up." "The gorge woke up," Thomas repeated incredulously. "Places have power," Ezekiel said simply. "Old places most of all. The natives knew it. They called this area the place where the wind howls all around, and avoided it when possible. They understood what we've forgotten." "Which is what?" Eliza pressed. "That some landscapes are more than dirt and trees. They're alive, aware, and the Linville Gorge has been sleeping for millennia, occasionally stirring to remind us of its presence. But 30 years ago, something disturbed it fully." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And now, it's hungry." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cabin's drafty walls. I thought of the unnatural silence in the forest, the way the trails seemed to shift behind us, the strange whispers in the night. "My wife drank from the river, just like yours," Ezekiel continued, nodding toward Dahlia. "The sickness took her within days. That's when I first saw the hag. She led me here, to this cabin. Been living here ever since." "Why?" Marcus asked, his hand protectively covering Dahlia's. "Why stay in a place that killed your wife? To warn others, to learn the gorge's moods and patterns, to understand." Ezekiel's eyes took on a fanatic gleam. "The hag showed me how to survive here, how to listen to the gorge. In return, I became its caretaker." "Its caretaker or its prisoner," Jasper murmured, but Ezekiel either didn't hear or chose to ignore the comment. As the day wore on, Dahlia's condition showed slight improvement. Her fever lowered, and the dark lines spreading across her skin seemed to fade slightly. Marcus refused to leave her side, whispering encouragement and wiping her brow with a damp cloth. The rest of us helped Ezekiel with various tasks, chopping wood, fetching water, repairing a section of the roof. It felt good to be productive, to focus on practical matters rather than the surreal situation we found ourselves in. As evening approached, Ezekiel became increasingly agitated, pacing the small cabin and repeatedly checking outside. "We need to secure everything before dark," he said, his voice tense. "The gorge is most active at night." "What exactly happens at night?" Thomas asked. Ezekiel paused in his pacing. "It hunts." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. We worked quickly then, following Ezekiel's instructions to barricade the door and windows. He placed strange bundles of herbs at each opening. A protection, he claimed. though against what he wouldn't specify. As darkness fell, the cabin grew oppressively quiet. We sat in the flickering light of a single lantern, listening to the unnatural silence outside. No crickets, no owls, not even the rustling of leaves in the wind. Just stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. And then it began. First came the whispers, dozens of voices, overlapping yet distinct, speaking words just beyond comprehension. They seemed to swirl around the cabin, pressing against the walls, seeking entry. "Don't listen," Ezekiel warned sharply. "They'll get in your head if you listen." Next came the scratching, subtle at first, then more insistent, like fingernails dragging across the wooden walls or branches scraping the roof. But the rhythm was too deliberate, too purposeful to be natural. Marcus held Dahlia close, his face a mask of terror. Thomas and Jasper gripped each other's hands so tightly their knuckles turned white. Eliza pressed against me, her breathing quick and shallow. "It's testing the barriers," Ezekiel explained, his voice eerily calm. "Looking for weakness." The night stretched endlessly, each hour marked by new, more disturbing phenomena. Shadows moved beneath the door, though no light source explained their formation. The temperature in the cabin plummeted, our breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. The lantern flame turned an unnatural blue, casting ghastly light across our frightened faces. Around what must have been midnight, a child's laughter echoed through the cabin, the same laughter that had led us here. But now it held a malevolent edge, rising and falling in a pattern that set my teeth on edge. "There is no child, is there?" I asked Ezekiel. He shook his head grimly. "The gorge knows what will draw you in. For some, it's a child's laughter. For others, a lover's call. It finds what you respond to and uses it against you." "But why?" Eliza demanded. "Why lure people in? What does it want?" Ezekiel's expression darkened. "It feeds on fear, on suffering, on the life force of those who become trapped here." "Like you," Thomas said softly. Ezekiel's gaze snapped to him. "I made a choice. I serve willingly." "Do you?" Jasper challenged. "Or are you just another victim, convinced you have a purpose to make your captivity bearable?" Ezekiel lunged across the cabin with surprising speed, grabbing Jasper by the throat. "You know nothing," he snarled, spittle flying from his lips. "The gorge chose me. The hag showed me the way." Thomas and Marcus pulled them apart, and Ezekiel retreated to a corner, muttering to himself. The outburst revealed what I had begun to suspect. Ezekiel might be helping us, but he was far from sane. Decades alone in these woods, convinced he was serving some ancient entity, had twisted his mind. As dawn finally approached, the phenomena gradually subsided. The whispers faded, the scratching stopped, and the unnatural cold receded. Exhausted, most of our group drifted into uneasy sleep. Only Ezekiel and I remained awake, watching the gray light slowly filter through the cracks in the barricaded windows. "You know we have to leave," I said quietly, careful not to wake the others. "Dahlia needs a hospital, and the rest of us need to get out of these woods." Ezekiel nodded slowly. "The hag led you to me for a reason. Perhaps that reason was simply for me to help your friend survive long enough to escape. Will you show us the way out?" He was silent for a long moment. "I can show you the path, but I cannot accompany you past the boundary of my protection. The gorge allows me to exist here only because I serve its purposes." "And what purpose do we serve?" I asked, dreading the answer. Ezekiel's unsettling blue eyes locked with mine. "Perhaps you're an offering, perhaps a test, or perhaps just sport." He sighed, suddenly looking every one of his years. "The gorge does not explain itself, even to me." When the others woke, Ezekiel outlined a route that he claimed would lead us back to a marked trail and eventually to the trailhead. Dahlia, though still weak, was conscious and able to communicate. The dark lines had receded significantly, giving us hope that she might fully recover with proper medical treatment. We prepared to leave, gathering our limited supplies and constructing another stretcher for Dahlia. Ezekiel provided us with water and some of his herbal remedy for Dahlia to take along the way. "Follow the rising sun," he instructed. "Do not deviate, no matter what you hear or see. The gorge will try to confuse you, to lure you deeper. Trust nothing but the direction of the light." As we prepared to depart, Ezekiel pulled me aside. "The hag may appear to you again," he whispered. "If she does, heed her guidance. She does not always serve the gorge." "What do you mean?" I asked, confusion clouding my already exhausted mind. "The hag has her own purpose," he said cryptically. "Sometimes she helps the gorge, sometimes she defies it. I've never understood why." He pressed a small leather pouch into my hand. "If the darkness comes before you reach safety, burn this. It will buy you time." The pouch contained what looked like dried herbs and small twigs, bound with a coarse thread. It smelled strongly of sage and something else I couldn't identify. We said our goodbyes to Ezekiel, who watched from the doorway of his cabin as we set off into the morning mist. Dahlia was secured on the stretcher, Marcus and Thomas taking the first shift carrying her. Eliza walked beside me, our argument about Winston-Salem seemingly trivial now in the face of our struggle for survival. For the first hour, our journey proceeded without incident. The forest was still unnaturally quiet, but the morning light filtering through the trees provided some comfort. We maintained a steady eastward course, using the sun's position to guide us as Ezekiel had instructed. Then the whispering began again. It started as a barely perceptible sound, like leaves rustling in a gentle breeze. But there was no wind. Gradually, the whispers became more distinct, forming words just at the edge of comprehension. Each of us heard something different. "Rebecca?" Eliza clutched my arm. "Did you hear that? It sounded like someone calling my name." "Don't listen," I warned, remembering Ezekiel's words. "It's trying to distract us." But the voices grew more insistent, more personal. I heard what sounded like my mother's voice, then Eliza's, each calling for help, each sounding desperately afraid. Judging by the others' expressions, they were experiencing similar torments. "We need to keep moving," I said firmly, gripping Eliza's hand. "East. Always east." The mist thickened around us, reducing visibility to mere feet in any direction. The sun, our primary navigational tool, became a diffuse glow, making it increasingly difficult to maintain our bearing. The trees seemed to close in, branches reaching down like skeletal fingers. "I need to rest," Thomas gasped after another hour of struggling through the increasingly dense forest. He and Jasper lowered Dahlia's stretcher carefully to the ground. Marcus immediately knelt beside his wife, checking her condition. "She's getting worse again," he reported, his voice tight with worry. "The marks are coming back." I examined Dahlia and confirmed his assessment. The dark lines were indeed returning, creeping up her neck once more. Her breathing had become labored, and her skin felt hot to the touch. "Give her more of Ezekiel's remedy," I suggested, retrieving the bottle he had provided. As Marcus administered the herbal liquid, I surveyed our surroundings. The mist swirled unnaturally, forming shapes that vanished when looked at directly. The forest had changed character yet again, the trees now ancient giants with gnarled trunks and roots that emerged from the ground like writhing snakes. "Does anyone recognize this area?" I asked, knowing the answer but hoping for reassurance. Silence confirmed my fear. We were still lost, perhaps even more so than before. "We should have stayed with Ezekiel," Jasper muttered. "At least the cabin was shelter." "And what? Lived there forever?" Thomas snapped, tension fraying his usual calm. "Become forest hermits talking to ghosts?" "Stop it," Eliza interjected. "Fighting won't help." A child's laughter suddenly echoed through the trees, the same laughter that had led us to Ezekiel's cabin, but this time it was accompanied by a physical manifestation, a small figure darting between distant trees, visible only as a blur of movement. "There," Jasper pointed. "I saw something." "Ignore it," I said firmly. "Remember what Ezekiel told us about the gorge using lures." But Jasper was already moving toward the sound, drawn as if hypnotized. "It's a child," he insisted. "Maybe someone who can help us." "Jasper, no." Thomas lunged after his husband, catching his arm. "It's not real." Jasper turned, his expression strangely vacant. "I have to help," he said mechanically. "The child is lost." Before any of us could react, he wrenched free from Thomas and sprinted into the mist. Thomas cried out and followed immediately. Within seconds, both had vanished from our sight. "Thomas! Jasper!" I shouted, but only the mocking echo of the child's laughter answered. "We have to go after them," Eliza insisted, starting forward. I grabbed her wrist, stopping her. "No. If we all separate, we're finished." The decision tore at me, but I knew it was our only chance. We have to keep moving east. Thomas knows that too. If they can, they'll do the same, and we might meet up. Marcus nodded grimly, his face ashen but resolute. "Rebecca's right. Dahlia won't survive much longer out here. We need to keep moving." With heavy hearts, we continued eastward, Marcus and I now carrying Dahlia between us. Eliza walked ahead, using her trekking poles to probe the ground, which had become treacherous with hidden roots and sudden drops. The day wore on, though it was hard to track time with our phones dead and the sun obscured by mist and canopy. The whispers continued, joined now by other sounds, cracking branches, heavy footfalls that seemed to circle our group, occasional growls or snarls from unseen creatures. "We're being hunted," Eliza whispered, falling back to walk beside me. Her face was pale with fatigue and fear, but her jaw was set with determination. I nodded, conserving my strength for carrying the stretcher. The constant vigilance, the physical exertion, and the psychological torment were taking their toll on all of us. But we kept moving, one foot in front of the other, clinging to the hope that the next clearing might reveal a trail, a road, any sign of the world beyond this nightmare forest. It was Eliza who spotted the structure first, a dark shape looming through the mist ahead. As we approached cautiously, it resolved into what appeared to be an old fire tower, its metal frame rusted but still standing. "This could be Short Off Mountain Lookout," Marcus said, hope flaring in his eyes. "That's near a trail that leads back to the highway." "Or it could be another trick," I cautioned, but the possibility of finding our bearings was too important to ignore. We made our way to the base of the tower. Up close, it was clearly long abandoned, with several rungs missing from the ladder that led to the observation platform above. The metal was corroded, patches of rust flaking away at a touch. "I'll climb up," Eliza volunteered. "If I can get above the tree line, maybe I can spot a landmark or see which way to go." I wanted to protest. The tower looked dangerously unstable, but she was right. We needed to know where we were, and this might be our only chance. "Be careful," I urged, squeezing her hand. "Test each rung before you put your weight on it." She nodded, slipping off her backpack and handing it to me. "Keep an eye out down here. I don't trust this place." As Eliza began her climb, Marcus and I laid Dahlia's stretcher in the clearing beside the tower. Her condition had stabilized somewhat thanks to Ezekiel's remedy, but she remained weak and feverish. The dark lines had spread across her face now, creating an eerie web-like pattern over her pale skin. "How much farther do you think?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we're still heading east. Sooner or later, we have to hit a trail or a road." He nodded, though the gesture held little conviction. We both knew our situation was growing more desperate by the hour. Above us, Eliza had nearly reached the observation platform. I watched anxiously as she navigated around a particularly corroded section of ladder, testing each rung carefully before proceeding. "I can see above the trees," she called down. "There's a ridge to the south that might be Table Rock Mountain." Hope surged within me. If she could identify a major landmark, we might be able to orient ourselves properly. Eliza climbed onto the platform, which creaked ominously under her weight. She moved to the railing, shading her eyes as she scanned the horizon. "I think I see Highway 183 to the east. It's maybe 3 or 4 miles from here." My heart leapt. A real chance at escape, at getting help for Dahlia. I was about to call up to Eliza when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The mist around the base of the tower was behaving strangely, swirling and coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape. As I watched in horror, it became more defined. A tall, slender figure with long, wispy appendages that might have been arms or tentacles. "Eliza!" I shouted. "Come down, now!" She turned at my cry, but the movement proved catastrophic. With a grinding shriek of metal, the platform beneath her gave way. Eliza screamed as she plummeted, managing to catch a rung of the ladder halfway down. But that section, too, was weakened by decades of exposure. It pulled away from the tower's frame, leaving Eliza dangling 30 feet above the ground. "Hold on!" I raced to the base of the tower, desperately searching for a way to help her. But the lower portion of the ladder was already gone, and the tower's frame was too smooth and corroded to climb. Above me, I heard Eliza gasping with effort as she tried to maintain her grip on the failing metal. "Rebecca!" she called down, her voice strained. "If I don't make it—" "Don't say that," I shouted. "Just hold on." The mist figure had moved closer now, hovering just at the edge of the clearing. It seemed to be watching, waiting. And it wasn't alone. Other shapes were forming in the mist surrounding us, dark silhouettes that shifted and changed, never quite resolving into recognizable forms. A groaning sound drew my attention back to Eliza. The section of ladder she clung to was tearing away from the tower entirely. I could see her fingers slipping, her strength failing. In desperation, I tore open my backpack and grabbed the emergency blanket I'd packed. "Marcus, help me." Together, we stretched the flimsy material between us, positioning ourselves beneath Eliza. It was a pitiful safety net, but it was all we had. "Let go," I called up to her. "We'll catch you." Eliza looked down, her face a mask of terror and exhaustion. "I can't—" Her words were cut short as the ladder gave way with a screech of tearing metal. Eliza fell, a scream tearing from her throat. The emergency blanket tensed between Marcus and me as she hit it, then tore clean through, the force knocking us both to the ground. I scrambled to my feet, rushing to where Eliza lay crumpled on the forest floor. Blood pooled beneath her head, and her right leg was bent at an impossible angle. But she was breathing, her eyes fluttering open as I knelt beside her. "Did I make it?" she whispered, her voice thick with pain. "You're alive," I choked out, tears streaming down my face. "That's what matters." But I knew immediately that our situation had gone from desperate to catastrophic. With Dahlia ill and Eliza badly injured, our chances of making it out of the gorge were dwindling rapidly. The mist figures had drawn closer, forming a loose circle around our small group. They seemed almost curious, tilting what might have been heads as they observed our plight. "What do they want?" Marcus whispered, his eyes darting from shape to shape. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I don't think they're here to help." As if in response to my words, one of the figures drifted forward. The mist, comprising its form, swirled faster, becoming more defined. It took on the shape of a woman, tall and willowy, with long flowing hair that moved as if underwater. I recognized her immediately. "The hag," I breathed. The mist woman raised what appeared to be an arm, pointing to the east just as she had before. Then she began to dissolve, her form becoming indistinct once more. "Wait," I called out. "Please, we need help." But she was already fading, the mist dispersing until only the natural fog of the forest remained. The other shapes had vanished as well, leaving us alone in the clearing with our injured and ill companions. Marcus looked at me, despair evident in his exhausted face. "What do we do now, Rebecca?" I took a deep breath, forcing down my panic. Think. We couldn't carry both Dahlia and Eliza, but we couldn't leave either of them behind. The highway Eliza had spotted was still miles away, through treacherous, possibly supernatural terrain. Then I remembered Ezekiel's parting gift, the leather pouch of herbs he'd pressed into my hand. "If the darkness comes before you reach safety, burn this," he had said. "It will buy you time." It wasn't full darkness yet, but our situation was dire enough. I retrieved the pouch from my pocket, fingers trembling. "What's that?" Marcus asked. "Something Ezekiel gave me," I explained. "A protection of sorts. At least, I hope so." I gathered some dry twigs and leaves, constructing a small fire pit. Using the flint and steel from my emergency kit, I managed to spark a flame. Once it caught, I placed Ezekiel's pouch directly into the fire. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. The flames turned a brilliant blue, shooting upward in a column that reached higher than the fire tower. The herbs inside the pouch released a thick aromatic smoke that spread rapidly, enveloping our small clearing in a protective fog. And with the smoke came a presence. The hag, now fully materialized. She was an elderly woman, just as we had glimpsed before, but solid now, no longer a figure of mist. Her white hair floated around her head, her deeply lined face solemn as she regarded us with eyes that had seen centuries pass. "You called," she said, her voice like dry leaves rustling. "Why?" I swallowed hard, finding my voice. "We need help. My friends are hurt. We're lost." The hag's gaze swept over our group, lingering on Dahlia's prone form and Eliza's broken body. "The gorge has marked them," she observed. "One by water, one by air. It rarely releases what it claims." "Please," I begged, "there must be something you can do." The ancient eyes settled on me, seeming to peer into my very soul. "And what would you give in exchange, Rebecca Mercer? What price are you willing to pay for their lives?" "Anything," I said without hesitation. The hag smiled, a chilling expression that held no mirth. "Be careful with such offers. Anything is a dangerous promise." She moved closer, her feet not quite touching the ground. "I will guide you out of the gorge," she said. "I will lead you to help for your friends. But in return, one of you must stay." "Stay?" Marcus echoed, horror dawning on his face. "The gorge requires balance," the hag explained. "If two are to leave its domain after being marked, another must take their place." "For how long?" I asked, though I feared I knew the answer. "Until the gorge releases them," she replied, "or until death, whichever comes first." Marcus and I exchanged glances. The choice was impossible, unbearable. And yet, what alternative did we have? Dahlia and Eliza would certainly die without proper medical attention. "I'll stay," I said finally, my voice steadier than I expected. "Rebecca, no," Eliza protested weakly from where she lay. "It has to be me," I insisted. "Marcus needs to be with Dahlia, and you're too injured to survive out here alone." "A noble offer," the hag said, her expression unreadable. "But the gorge does not want you, Rebecca Mercer. Your caution, your preparation. These things make you unsuitable. The gorge prefers the reckless, the arrogant, those who enter its domain without respect." Her gaze shifted to Marcus. "It wants him." Dahlia stirred on her stretcher, her eyes fluttering open. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Take me instead. I'm already marked." The hag considered this, head tilting slightly. "You offer yourself willingly?" "Yes," Dahlia managed, strength somehow entering her voice despite her condition. "If Marcus and the others can go free, I'll stay." "Dahlia, no," Marcus cried, clutching her hand. "I won't leave you." "You have to," she said gently. "Our daughter needs her father. I've made my choice." I watched in silent horror as this exchange unfolded. It felt wrong, allowing Dahlia to sacrifice herself. But what could I do? The hag had made it clear. Someone had to stay for the others to go free. The hag seemed satisfied with Dahlia's offer. "Very well. When night falls, the others will be guided to safety. You will remain as the Gorge's guest." Guest or prisoner? I couldn't help asking. The hag's ancient eyes turned to me. "Is there a difference in the end? Both are kept, both are fed, both serve a purpose." With that cryptic statement, she began to fade once more, becoming translucent, then just a wisp of mist that dissipated into the surrounding fog. "We can't let this happen," Marcus said desperately once she had gone. "We can't leave Dahlia here." "We may not have a choice," I said gently. "If what the hag says is true, this might be the only way to save Eliza and get you out safely." "Then I'll stay with her," he insisted. "I won't abandon my wife." "And what about Eva?" Dahlia asked weakly. "Our daughter needs you. Marcus, I need you to survive, to take care of her." I watched the conflict play across Marcus's face, love for his wife warring with his duty to their child. It was an impossible position, a cruel choice that no one should have to make. As we debated our limited options, the day gradually faded into twilight. The blue flames from Ezekiel's herbs had burned down to embers, but the protective smoke still lingered, keeping the forest's malevolent presence at bay. For the moment, at least, we were safe. I used the time to treat Eliza's injuries as best I could with our limited supplies. Her right leg was definitely broken, and I suspected she had a concussion from the impact. I fashioned a splint from branches and strips of fabric torn from my shirt, then cleaned and bandaged the wound on her head. "You're good at this," she murmured as I worked. "Should have been a doctor." "Too squeamish," I replied, forcing a smile. "I faint at the sight of blood, remember?" "Liar," she said weakly. "You've been amazing through all of this." I paused, meeting her gaze. "I'm sorry about the Winston-Salem thing," she continued. "I should have talked to you first." "It doesn't matter now," I assured her. "All that matters is getting you to a hospital." As full darkness descended, the hag reappeared, materializing from the mist that had never fully dissipated. But she wasn't alone. Two familiar figures emerged behind her, looking exhausted but unharmed. "Jasper! Thomas!" I cried in relief. They rushed forward, embracing us despite their obvious fatigue. "We thought we'd never find you," Thomas said. "We've been wandering for hours." "The child," Jasper added, his voice hollow. "It led us in circles, deeper and deeper, until she found us." He nodded toward the hag, who watched our reunion with impassive eyes. Quickly, I explained the situation. Eliza's fall, Dahlia's offer, the bargain we'd struck with the hag. Thomas and Jasper listened in horror, their faces paling as they understood the implications. "There must be another way," Thomas insisted. The hag's voice cut through the night air. "There is not. One stays, or all perish. That is the law of the Gorge." "Then let me stay instead of Dahlia," Jasper offered unexpectedly. "This is my fault. I followed the child. I got us separated." "Jasper, no." Thomas grabbed his husband's arm. The hag regarded Jasper with those ancient, knowing eyes. "Another noble offer. But the bargain is struck. Dahlia Reeves has given herself to the Gorge. The exchange cannot be undone." A sob escaped Marcus as he knelt beside his wife. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing what would be their final moments together. The hag waited patiently, unmoved by the emotional scene. When their goodbyes were done, she gestured toward the eastern edge of the clearing. "The path is open, but only until dawn. You must leave now." With Thomas and Jasper's help, we constructed a more secure stretcher for Eliza. Marcus, after a final, heart-wrenching embrace with Dahlia, joined us. His face was a mask of grief, but he moved with purpose, his duty to their daughter now his driving force. As we prepared to depart, I approached Dahlia one last time. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, taking her hand. "This isn't right." "It's okay, Rebecca," she said, a strange serenity in her eyes. "I understand now. The gorge has been calling me since I drank from the river. This is where I'm meant to be." Her words chilled me, reminding me too much of Ezekiel's fanaticism. Had the gorge already begun to alter her mind, to make her accept her fate? "Follow the path of mist," the hag instructed. "Do not stray, no matter what you see or hear. By dawn, you will reach the highway." With heavy hearts, we began our journey. A trail of glowing mist stretched before us, illuminating our way through the dark forest. Marcus and Thomas carried Eliza's stretcher, while Jasper and I led the way, watchful for any signs of danger. Behind us, the clearing grew smaller, Dahlia's form becoming indistinct in the darkness. The last glimpse I had of her was sitting upright on her stretcher, the hag standing beside her like a sentinel. Then the forest swallowed the view, and they were gone. The journey through the night was strangely peaceful. The oppressive silence had lifted, replaced by the normal sounds of a forest after dark, the hoot of owls, the chirp of crickets, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. It was as if, having accepted its tribute, the gorge was allowing us to pass unmolested. We followed the glowing mist trail in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Marcus moved mechanically, his face blank with shock and grief. Eliza drifted in and out of consciousness on her stretcher, occasionally murmuring incoherently. Thomas and Jasper stayed close together, their hands sometimes brushing as if to reassure themselves of the other's presence, and I led the way, my mind churning with the events of the past days. Had we really made the right choice? Could I have done something differently? The questions haunted me with every step. As the hag had promised, we reached Highway 183 just as dawn was breaking. The sight of the asphalt road, of power lines and guardrails and all the trappings of civilization, brought tears to my eyes. It felt like emerging from another world. We flagged down the first car that passed, a pickup truck driven by an elderly farmer heading to market. His eyes widened at the sight of us, filthy, injured, wild-eyed with exhaustion and trauma. "Lord, have mercy," he breathed. "What happened to y'all?" "Hiking accident," I explained simply. "We need to get to a hospital." He didn't ask questions, just helped us load Eliza into the truck bed, where Marcus sat with her, holding her hand. The rest of us squeezed into the cab, and he drove us to the nearest emergency room in the town of Morganton. Everything after that was a blur of medical personnel, police questions, phone calls to worried family members. We told a sanitized version of events. We got lost, Eliza fell from an abandoned fire tower, Dahlia became separated from the group while seeking help. Search parties were organized, but they found no sign of Dahlia in the gorge. After weeks of searching, she was officially declared missing, presumed dead. Marcus returned to Asheville with their daughter Eva, a shell of the boisterous man he had been. Thomas and Jasper moved away shortly after, unable to bear the reminders of our ordeal. And Eliza, once her leg had healed, took the position in Winston-Salem. We tried to make the long-distance relationship work, but the strain of what we had experienced, combined with the distance, proved too much. We parted amicably 6 months later. As for me, I stayed in Asheville, but I was changed. I became obsessed with the Linville Gorge, researching its history, its legends, collecting accounts of strange occurrences within its boundaries. I learned that the area had a long history of disappearances, of hikers experiencing lost time, of bizarre phenomena that defied explanation. I never returned to the gorge itself, though. I couldn't bring myself to cross its boundaries again, knowing what dwelled within, knowing who dwelled within. Sometimes, on cold October nights when the wind blows just right, I think I can hear whispers, Dahlia's voice, or perhaps the hag's, calling me back to the gorge. In my darkest moments, I wonder if our escape was just another trick, if we're still there somehow, trapped in an illusion of freedom while the gorge feeds on our belief that we escaped. But mostly, I just remember the look in Dahlia's eyes at the end, that strange serenity, that acceptance, and I wonder if she's still there, wandering the misty forests with Ezekiel and the hag, perhaps becoming a part of the gorge's endless, hungry legend. And I wonder if someday, years from now, some hiker will glimpse a woman with web-like markings on her skin, standing silently among the trees. And I wonder if they'll know enough to turn back before the gorge claims them too. Because the one thing I know for certain is that the Linville Gorge is awake now, and it's always hungry.